School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yamin of Revolution. The world is a stage. World War III alert. Putin arms his allies. The final battle is about to begin. But before we get into that, y'all be sure to wipe y'all feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like it, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. There's a lot going on the global stage. We're going to take a look at all of it.
Furious world leaders have kicked Donald Trump and the United States off military bases in their countries. We're hearing from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Bahrain and Jordan and Iraq and other Arab nations saying the United States military bases in our Arab nations right now is a massive liability. Donald Trump is erratic. Donald Trump doesn't consult us before he and Netanyahu engage in war crimes. Get the hell out of here. And these Arab world leaders, they are leaking to the Washington Post and others to talk about what is going on. So here's the latest from the Washington Post. Let's talk about that. Then I want to talk about what Donald Trump is doing. I want to talk about how Iran is moving in and swooping in as the United States is being pushed out. Now the United States is basically relegated to a small base on Diego Garcia, which is 2,000 miles away from the Middle East at this point, because the U.S. has gotten kicked out of mostly every other military base other than Israel. So this is what we're learning from the Washington Post article. But this is what we've been reporting on now for weeks and months at the Midas Touch Network. Gulf allies are growing. They've grown frustrated with Trump's handling of the Iran war, viewing U.S. policy under Donald Trump as erratic and ineffective. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, while they remain dependent on the U.S. security support based on prior arrangements, they want the U.S. to get the hell out. Now, CENTCOM commander Brad Cooper also just went to visit all of these Middle East countries to basically beg them, can we please keep a presence? We still need to keep our military bases over here. And we're also seeing right now what happens when the U.S. has basically been kicked off these military bases. I mean, it's been both a Arab nation saying get the hell out, but also the United States military bases don't have the Patriot interceptors, the THAAD interceptors, or other radar or defense capabilities to stop the Iranian strikes. I mean, the Iran strikes at Bahrain's Fifth Fleet is one of the main reasons why food and other items aren't making their way to the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS George W. Bush. I mean, similarly, you're talking about Fujairah, the base in the United Arab Emirates, and other bases in Al Udeid by Qatar. I mean, these were bases that used to be used by the United States in order to provide it was important bases, for the United States security umbrella in the region. But these were bases where logistical supply routes and logistical supplies were provided to the supercarriers and to the ships and to other American interest in the region more generally. Let's take a look at what they're saying right now in the Washington Post, and let's take a look at what CENTCOM is doing. Frustration with Washington growing in the Persian Gulf region. U.S. allies increasingly concerned that Donald Trump is unable to manage diplomacy necessary to secure peace with Iran, that he's incapable of even doing a deal. We knew that he's incapable of doing a deal. It goes on to say that there are multiple top-level officials and former diplomats. They're speaking to the United States. We're talking about Saudi Arabia. We're talking about UAE. We're talking about Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain. Also, though not mentioned in here, we're talking about Iraq. We're talking about Jordan. We're talking about other Middle East nations as well, viewing the United States as just completely and utterly erratic. And they've begun debating why the hell should the U.S. continue to have any type of presence here in the future. As we've reported on the Midas Touch Network, this has also created an opening for Beijing. China has already had a presence there, but increasingly these Middle East nations look to China. China's foreign minister is Wang Yi, and of course you have Xi Jinping. And in China, they're saying, well, we can be helpful. Why don't you buy our weapons? Why don't you buy our infrastructure? Why don't we do energy deals together while the U.S. power wanes in the area significantly? This also comes at the same time where we've talked about the Mecca Pact with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan already in an alliance, right? Sunni alliance. And then you bring in Turkey as well into the Sunni alliance. And you've got in Pakistan a nuclear power. In Turkey, you've got a very large military. And then, of course, you have Saudi Arabia, energy-rich nation. These three nations also viewing the Mecca Pact as a framework. This is what Erdogan, president of Turkey, said. This is a framework for our new NATO in the region, and that this is basically going to replace the U.S. security umbrella. I think we can expect Egypt to join soon, although Saudi Arabia said, let's wait a little bit to bring Egypt in. I wouldn't be shocked if we have Qatar joining soon. And this is at the time where, even like United Arab Emirates is like, where's our place in all of this? Because the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain previously entered into the Abraham Accords with Israel during Donald Trump's first term, believing that would provide the security umbrella, U.S., Israel, and them. And that's actually proven to be a negative for them and has made them even a bigger target. This past week, we've been covering on the Midas Touch Network how there were some flights that took place from UAE into Iran, and it looked like it was a plane that would normally bring with it something like either money or resources or some high-level interaction was taking place. We were able to track on the satellite footage and the air traffic footage these planes going from the UAE to Iran. I think that is indeed notable right now. This Washington Post article cites lots of top officials is basically saying, look, even before some of the latest Donald Trump threatening Iran and going back to war, even though we were always in war, and then saying, I did a deal, there's not a deal, I did a deal. They were fed up already with the Trump regime, but now it's just like, we need you to get the hell out of here. So you have that going on. Now you have CENTCOM, their commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, who's just been absolutely awful. From a messaging standpoint, the guy has turned CENTCOM into like a deranged MAGA account. I mean, when you read these social media posts from CENTCOM, it's like, is Donald Trump writing these posts? What the hell? I think as a patriotic American, you got to call it out. Calling out CENTCOM doesn't make us less patriotic. When CENTCOM betrays its core mission and its core values, you're like, what the hell are they even doing? And they look incompetent. And it's like, we control the Strait of Hormuz. Everybody use the southern Oman route. It's open. It's like, no, it's not. You sound like Trump. You sound like crazy. What are you even talking about, Brad Cooper and CENTCOM? Then, of course, all the logistical issues with the super carriers that Midas Touch Network has consistently been reporting about. But anyway, CENTCOM made this announcement. So you have that article from the Washington Post. But if you've been following the Midas Touch Network, we've been closely tracking the Middle East nations saying to the Trump regime, get out. We're blocking you. We're blocking our bases to ever be used by you, at least as it relates to Iran. Get the hell out. And now the United States relegated to this Diego Garcia smaller base, 2,000 miles away, so hard to bring supplies. So then the CENTCOM commander, he's frantic. The U.S. is frantic because now they're like, come on, please, we need to stay. Let us stay. Don't pick China over us. Pick me. Right? That's what we've been reduced to at this point. So this is the post from CENTCOM. CENTCOM commander completes 10-day trip to the Middle East. Now, one of the things I noticed on the CENTCOM post, and this is what I mean, that their communications strategy is just so damn awful. And their behavior, frankly, has been really horrific. And so CENTCOM originally released an image, a map depicting Gaza and the West Bank as Israeli territory when it showed a map of the Middle East, and it showed the areas that CENTCOM's commander Brad Cooper went. And then 2 hours after posting it, they then edited it, but the damage was done and it was too late because it showed what the intentions were all along. And for Middle East nations who are concerned and deeply worried about aiding and abetting the genocide in Palestine, having Brad Cooper post an image of a map that wipes out the West Bank and wipes out Gaza on a social media post, I could tell you did more damage in terms of, trying to convince Saudi Arabia and other Middle East countries to work with them than the trip itself actually did. And then they edited it 2 hours later as though nobody was going to see. As this one account says, this is the plan which Arab kingdoms back, huh? CENTCOM removes Palestine and gives it all to Israel. And then 2 hours later, they edit it and then they show the West Bank, but then they don't show Gaza as being its own sovereign territory. Here's what Brad Cooper posts. The commander of U.S. Central Command completed a 10-day trip to the Middle East on August 15th that included visits to 6 countries and to a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier operating in the Arabian Sea. Oh, nice of you to finally go to the aircraft carrier, Brad Cooper, after all the press bringing attention to the fact that our sailors and our Marines aboard these super carriers are being treated horribly. But the Midas Touch Network has also been reporting it's not unique to the super carriers, Abraham Lincoln and George H.W. Bush. Before that, of course, it was the Gerald Ford super carrier, but also the other battleships in the area, the other ships in the area, also having horrible conditions. And the bases had horrible conditions before the U.S. had to basically abandon them because, one, the conditions were horrible, but two, our service members were living in these containerized living spaces that look like basically the back of a truck. It's like a truck container. And those would get hit by ballistic missiles and Shahi drones. And our service members suffered traumatic brain injuries, to which the Trump regime referred to it as minor injuries. A minor traumatic brain injury is not something that occurs. A traumatic brain injury is traumatic. Yes, it is. Admiral Brad Cooper met with senior civilian and military leaders in Bahrain, Iran, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, and spent time with deployed U.S. service members. Also, when Brad Cooper posted the images of his visit, it seems that he was at the USS Abraham Lincoln yesterday, August 15th, for the first time. After all these stories broke, that's when he decided to go to the Abraham Lincoln. While ashore, Cooper recognized exceptional performers, re-enlisted troops, and presided over the leadership transition for the Combined Joint Task Force. While at sea, Cooper met with sailors and Marines aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln for the second time this year. He previously visited the aircraft carrier in February with U.S. Special Envoy for Peace Missions, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Why the hell is Witkoff? That should have been red flag number 1. Witkoff and Kushner, these two idiots. They have not been appointed by anybody to hold these positions. These are positions that require Senate confirmation. They're both self-interested. They both have business dealings in the Middle East, and both of them shouldn't be nowhere near. They're not diplomats. They don't know what the hell they're doing. And this is one of the main things that these Middle East nations see. They see these two people who are focused on enriching themselves, who are screwing over everybody and in a quest to, it seems like make money for themselves. And they've become increasingly, viewed by these Middle East countries as, one of the main reasons why they can't trust the United States of America. You think it's about time you freaking realize that. Then it says, during Cooper's latest trip, he addressed the entire Lincoln team and thanked them for their tremendous dedication and courage. Of course they have dedication and courage. The issue is that you have an erratic commander-in-chief. And erratic would be the nicest thing that you can say about him, because it's far worse than that. I mean, you've got someone posting memes about being a pirate and taking over Iranian ships, and then he'll say one day there's a deal, and the next day we're going to blow the hell out of them. We're going to destroy their civilization. And then the next day, oh, we're doing so amazing over here. Then the next day he says, oh, our troops should be out there forever. Remember he said on Friday? I want to see our troops on the Abraham Lincoln be out there much longer. They haven't been out there long enough. My beautiful blockade. Dude, what are you talking about? The family members of our service members are absolutely livid at Donald Trump. They see what an erratic human being he is. His stuff may still play to a small, extreme MAGA base at weird rallies that are increasingly in these really small areas. But the people see what the hell is going on right now. And they're like, this person and the Witkoffs and the Kushners, we don't trust them with our family members who are serving our country. We don't trust, we know our soldiers and our service members are courageous, but we don't have a courageous commander in chief. We have a 5-time draft dodger who cares more about enriching himself. And he's demonstrated what a coward he is, hiding in a cafeteria container truck with his human printer, Natalie Harp, and sneaking out in Turkey. And so you have all of this going on. You have Israel continuing to strike Lebanon, 11 killed in the latest Israeli strikes in Lebanon, which again is a major barrier to ever reaching peace in the region. Israel's national security minister Ben-Gvir yesterday saying, as quickly as possible, we will enter all of Gaza, settle all of Gaza, and encourage emigration. I think targeted elimination should be carried out in Gaza every night. Take out 30, take out 40, not only those who endanger you at this particular moment. There are people there who shouldn't be alive. They shouldn't live. I'm already being generous, calling them even people. There are people who say, I'm crazy. This guy is crazy. Yes, you have to be insane in the Middle East. We are in the Middle East. That's Israel's national security minister saying that. We also know, if Phil Gordon says, so Jared Kushner said to be visiting Israel this upcoming week to discuss Gaza, but developments on the West Bank may be even more urgent. Ahead of fall elections, the Israeli government is rapidly advancing new settlements with the goal of encircling Palestinian cities, withholding customs revenues to bankrupt the Palestinian Authority, turning a blind eye to settler violence. And now the defense minister says he wants to turn over responsibility for law enforcement over Israeli settlers to the civilian police, who have no capacity to protect the population and are overseen by an extremist settler himself. The Jewish supremacy.
Revolutionary salute to our queen. Lala, go harder for the 2 Jews to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, queen. Salute. Grand rising.
This national security minister, Ben-Gvir. Now would be a good time for Trump to prove his claim that Bibi will do whatever I want by getting him to reverse course, Phil Gordon says, because if he doesn't, the West Bank could explode as Israel proceeds with a de facto annexation Trump said he would not allow. Just further showing the Middle East nations that Donald Trump lies about everything and can't be trusted with a damn thing. Also, the Wall Street Journal reporting this weekend, we already knew, the White House has become increasingly pessimistic in recent weeks about achieving a final nuclear settlement with Tehran. And so Trump just wants an indefinite blockade while we don't have bases in the Middle East anymore, really, while our service members have evacuated all these bases in the Middle East, while we don't have the interceptors in order to stop Iranian strikes. And so all the logistical routes are basically severed, other than in Diego Garcia, which is 2,000 miles away. So our service members suffer aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, the USS George H.W. Bush. Now we're bringing in the USS George Washington from the Pacific, except now we're not going to have any super carriers at all in the Pacific. And now the people on the George Washington are going to experience what's going on in the Persian Gulf, because if you don't have the ability, if you don't have the supply chain, if your logistics are completely destroyed, some of the most basic stuff, we've received lots of messages from the family of female soldiers aboard different ships, about the super carriers and other ships and in bases. The United States is not supplying the female service members with feminine hygiene products. And they're not getting essential feminine hygiene products that they need right now. And, just the basic stuff, not getting, fruits and vegetables, and not getting any, not getting their mail, not getting the most basic stuff. Meanwhile, you have one of Iran's senior members of parliament saying the U.S. president ought to worry about his own security rather than his endless bluffing regarding the Strait of Hormuz before he ends up hiding in a food truck. and just become an absolute laughingstock to the world. Iran's General Mohammad Naqvi said the following. He goes, when it comes to the Trump administration, not only do these people not work for the benefit of humanity, they don't even work for the benefit of the United States of America. They work for their own interests. As soon as the stock market closes, they start hostilities. The stock market opens, they send positive messages to raise stock prices. All the while, they are buying and selling the stocks themselves, what he just told PBS right there. Meanwhile, you have Donald Trump continuing to attack allies. He posted this bizarre photo of himself and Xi Jinping like smiling together. And it's an article where the White House accuses 40 countries, including Canada, Japan, Mexico, and the EU of helping China evade U.S. tariffs by rerouting and relabeling Chinese goods. The practice could involve around $60 billion in trade and cost the United States tens of billions of dollars. But Donald Trump seems to be praising Xi Jinping for it while attacking our allies for it. And then you have Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson saying the following as well. This passage from Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov aptly describes the situation which the U.S. system of governance and foreign policy regarding Iran and the region finds itself in due to its extreme reliance on lies. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to such a pass that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and for others. That's how Iran's speaking, while Donald Trump's posting bizarre, deranged memes of himself and George Washington and AI memes of himself as a pirate taking over Iranian cargo ships. And the Middle East nations like, enough, get the hell out of here. Get the hell out of here. And that's why our super carriers aren't getting supplies that they need. And it's why we've been relegated to Diego Garcia at this point. That's what the United States has become. It's happening before our eyes. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers.
Iran may have not defeated the United States in the missile war, but it may have forced Washington to use its critical weapons at a dangerous rate. New reports suggest that the American air defense system may have reached depletion in that fight, and the Iranians have refined new missiles that are able to change course while flying. Now, the next report brings you a closer look at the situation in West Asia.
The most important battle may not have been decided by missiles that hit their targets. it may have been decided by the missiles America had to fire. During the final stages of the US-Iran conflict 2 weeks ago, Iranian forces changed how they attacked American bases. Waves of drones and ballistic missiles were combined with more difficult flight profiles, forcing American air defense crews to react repeatedly. And then came a remarkable claim. Iran's Revolutionary Guards said some of its missiles can now change course during flight, using guidance systems to alter their trajectory and bypass air defense systems. Tehran says the capability was used during the recent conflict. Missiles change course mid-air using on-board guidance systems, aerodynamic control surfaces like fins and wings, and thrust vectoring to alter their flight path dynamically. This maneuverability helps them evade enemy air defenses, avoid the incoming interceptors, and hit their targets with overwhelming force. The tactic forced American forces in the Gulf to expend scarce interceptor missiles. Iran also refined its use of drones and missiles as a combined attack. Drones could force defenders to engage, missiles could follow. In June, Iran launched waves of drones and missiles against 3 U.S. bases in Jordan. One later strike on July 17 hit a housing unit at a U.S. base, reportedly killing 3 American service members. After heavy fighting over the last 5 months, the U.S. forces have severely depleted their arsenal. Reuters reported that the U.S. Army had used virtually all of its highly accurate long-range missiles during the 5-month conflict. Experts say that the Iranian forces are closely studying another war. In Ukraine, Russia has been using combinations of ballistic and cruise missiles to distract Ukrainian air defenses, and then rushed in drones. The effect has been deadly and devastating. The same tactic has been applied by Iran while taking on a much bigger adversary. IRGC now says that Iranian forces must be able to expand their operations and carry out missions far beyond Iran's borders.
Whenever the situation demands and the order is issued, we must be capable of extending operations into enemy territory and conducting missions far from our own land. These are the characteristics of an offensive doctrine that must be realized. The IRGC is now tasked with achieving this readiness and developing the capability to execute such operations at the appropriate time.
No one thought that Iran could resist in this way against America, with the Israeli regime accompanying it and the support of many other countries, including all Western countries and some other countries that we all know, and not bow its head and ultimately force the enemy to ask for negotiations.
The rhetoric from Iran is rising. That doesn't mean Iran defeated America's military. It means Tehran exposed a different vulnerability. A missile can cost less than the interceptor needed to stop it. Multiply that across hundreds of launches, and the defender faces a brutal choice: keep firing expensive interceptors or accept greater risk. The US president, who has claimed repeatedly that Iranian military has been completely destroyed, now says that it is the US which has complete control over the Strait of Hormuz.
We have total control over the Hormuz Strait right now. They don't have control. We have total control. We own it. And at some point, maybe they'll do something and then they get blown away. But right now, we're in a very good position. We have a country that has been the bully of the Middle East for 50 years. It's really 51 if you think about it, right? We've been saying 47 for 4 years. And they're no longer the bully of the Middle East.
Iran has been attacked by the most powerful weapons, by the world's most powerful military. The aim was to cripple the Iranian military. But Iran continues to strike back with fire and fury. Most of Iran's missiles and launchers were hidden in underground facilities heavily bombed by US and Israeli forces. Iran later restored many sites and resumed attacks, disrupting shipping in the Strait of Hormuz and threatening US troops in the region. Now, more than 2 weeks later, the missiles are silent. The bombing has halted, but the strategic pressure remains. Iran has demonstrated what it can do with massed missile and drone attacks. America has demonstrated how much ammunition such a campaign can consume. And if the fighting returns, the next battle may be decided not only by who can launch more missiles, it may be decided by who can afford to stop them.
Is the Korean Peninsula inching toward a catastrophic nuclear confrontation? Tensions are soaring ahead of a major joint military exercise by the United States and South Korea, with North Korea issuing a fresh warning and accusing Washington of pushing the region to the brink of nuclear conflict. North Korea has denounced the upcoming U.S.-South Korea joint military drills as a dangerous provocation, according to a spokesperson for North Korea's foreign ministry, quoted by the state-run Korean Central News Agency, KCNA. Military cooperation among the United States, Japan, and South Korea is rapidly evolving into a nuclear alliance. Pyongyang warned that it would respond to a new level of threat with a new level of deterrence. The spokesperson said, the U.S. has announced that the forthcoming exercises are fundamentally different from those conducted over the past 5 years and intended to enhance warfighting capabilities based on the new realities of modern warfare. North Korea also vowed to further strengthen its nuclear deterrent, accusing the United States of pursuing a new nuclear strategy that lowers the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons and could push global security to the brink of a nuclear war. In a separate commentary, state media KCNA cited expanding U.S. nuclear cooperation with South Korea and extended deterrence commitments to Japan, claiming the Korean Peninsula could become a primary target under Washington's alleged strategy. The joint military exercise, Olchi Freedom Shield, is scheduled to begin on August 17th and continue through August 27th. The drills will include training to counter drone attacks, GPS disruption, and cyber threats, reflecting lessons learned from modern conflicts and North Korea's evolving military capabilities. The exercise will involve 18,000 South Korean troops, alongside personnel from the 28,500-strong U.S. military contingent stationed in South Korea. South Korea has also responded to Pyongyang's latest warning. The Unification Ministry said this was North Korea's first official response to the upcoming exercise, noting that Pyongyang routinely condemns the annual drills as provocative. Meanwhile, Colonel Ryan Donald, spokesperson for the U.S.-South Korea Combined Forces Command, said North Korea's involvement in the war in Europe has altered the threat facing Allied forces on the Korean Peninsula. He said, "They've taken those lessons they learned there and brought them back to North Korea. Our training accounts for that threat," he told reporters. The warning comes just days after North Korea launched another ballistic missile towards waters off the peninsula's east coast. The launch took place on Wednesday, only 6 days after another missile test, underscoring the rapid pace of North Korea's weapons activity. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has continued expanding the country's nuclear arsenal since diplomacy with U.S. President Donald Trump collapsed in 2019. North Korea has also deepened military cooperation with Russia, supplying troops and ammunition to support Moscow's war against Ukraine in exchange for economic and military assistance. At the same time, Pyongyang has sought to strengthen ties with China, its largest trading partner and closest economic partner. Amid the escalating rhetoric, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has renewed calls for dialogue. Speaking on Saturday during celebrations marking the anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japanese colonial rule, Lee said his government would pursue peaceful coexistence with North Korea. He added that his government would seek safeguards for preventing accidental conflict and reiterated the need to replace the Korean peninsula's long-standing armistice with a lasting peace regime. We will embark on a journey to end the war and transform the Korean peninsula's unstable armistice system into a peace regime. Let us set aside mutual threats toward one another and begin discussions among the parties concerned to end this long-running war. Through this, effective measures to halt the advancement of the North's nuclear program can also be discussed. Over the past year, South Korea and Japan have built a foundation of trust through active shuttle diplomacy. We have expanded cooperation in supply chains, energy, and advanced industries, and steadily broadened the foundation for exchange between future generations. Going forward, our government will continue to pursue pragmatic diplomacy grounded in national interest, broadening the horizon of cooperation for mutual benefit, and pooling our wisdom to resolve shared challenges together. North Korea has fired another ballistic missile, its second such test in less than a week, sending a fresh warning to South Korea, the United States, and Japan just days before major joint military exercises. The launch is widely seen as Pyongyang's protest against the upcoming drills, which North Korea routinely condemns as rehearsals for an invasion. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the missile was launched from the Wonsan area on North Korea's eastern coast at around 6 a.m. on Wednesday, August 12th. It traveled more than 700 kilometers, or roughly 435 miles, before landing in waters outside Japan's exclusive economic zone, according to Japanese authorities. Japan's defense ministry also detected the launch, but said there was no indication that the missile entered Japanese waters. The defense ministry also condemned the threatening act by North Korea.
It was at approximately 5:59 this morning that the government of North Korea successfully launched at least one ballistic missile, sending it in an easterly direction as it departed from their eastern coastline. We are currently conducting a very thorough analysis of all the details in close cooperation with our partners in the United States and South Korea. Our current assessment indicates that the missile reached a maximum altitude of about 90 kilometers, traveled a total distance of roughly 690 kilometers, and finally landed in the Sea of Japan, well outside our nation's exclusive economic zone. Furthermore, these ballistic missile launches are in clear violation of relevant UN Security Council resolutions and represent a serious matter concerning the safety of all our citizens. Regarding this launch, our country has officially lodged a very stern protest and strongly condemned North Korea through our established embassy channels in Beijing. The Ministry of Defense will continue to work closely with the United States, South Korea, and other partners to protect the lives and property of our citizens, and we will devote our full efforts to information gathering, analysis, and surveillance.
The timing has drawn particular attention. South Korea and U.S. announced 2 days earlier that their annual large-scale military exercises will begin on August 17th, aimed at strengthening their ability to respond to potential North Korean attacks. South Korea's military said it remains prepared to counter any provocation in coordination with the United States. South Korea's National Security Council condemned the launch as an act of provocation and urged Pyongyang to immediately stop its ballistic missile activity. such launches are prohibited under multiple UN Security Council resolutions. North Korea has nevertheless expanded its missile and weapons programs since high-level diplomacy between leader Kim Jong-un and then U.S. President Donald Trump collapsed in 2019. Analysts say Kim may be using the growing arsenal as leverage to seek concessions from Washington, including possible relief from international sanctions. Pyongyang has previously responded to major South Korea-U.S. exercises, including Ulchi Freedom Shield, with missile launches and threats. The United States and South Korea insist their exercises are defensive. After last year's drills began, Kim accused the allies of showing a will to ignite a war and promised proactive and overwhelming countermeasures. The latest test follows a short-range ballistic missile launch detected by South Korea, the US, and Japan on August 6th, marking North Korea's first reported ballistic weapons activity since late June. Meanwhile, Kim has strengthened North Korea's international partnerships, deepening military cooperation with Russia and supporting its war in Ukraine with troops and ammunition. Pyongyang has also moved to reinforce ties with China, with President Xi Jinping visiting the North Korean capital in June for the first time in 7 years.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Ritter's Rant. Today's topic is the North Koreans are coming. The North Koreans are coming. I mean, this at least seems to be the a cry of despair that is echoing throughout the throughout Ukraine and the collective West about the possible deployment of North Korean combat troops to Russia. Now, we know that this wouldn't be the first time this happened. Back in 2024, 2025, North Korea dispatched, by some estimates, up to 16,000 combat troops to the Kursk region to help repel a NATO-inspired Ukrainian invasion of Russia. They didn't fight in the Donbass. They didn't fight in Novorossiya. They fought on the soil of old Mother Russia, defending Russia from an invasion by foreigners, by Ukrainians, backed by NATO, trained by NATO, equipped by NATO. And from all accounts, the North Koreans did very well. Even the Ukrainians who fought against them said that they were extraordinarily well disciplined. They didn't take any North Korean prisoners, and this should be a word of a warning to those who think that any future potential conflict between the United States and North Korea would be a walkover. This is how disciplined the North Koreans were. Before they would be allowed to be taken prisoner, they would kill themselves with a hand grenade. There were no prisoners, and there will be no prisoners. They literally fight to the death. It's tough to defeat an enemy that is willing to fight to the death, because there's not that much discipline like that in the West. We know Europe doesn't even want to fight, and we know that America is casualty averse. And so the concept of putting our soldiers up against well-trained, well-equipped fanatics, that shouldn't be something that anybody should look forward to. In fact, we're not looking forward to it. There are military exercises getting ready to get underway in South Korea, annual exercises where the United States and the South Koreans
play war games where they're pretending to fight the North Koreans. But this year, the American military spokesperson said that they have to change what they're doing because now North Korea has incorporated into its doctrine, operation, and tactics the lessons learned from the combat experience in Kursk. That the North Koreans now are combat hardened and are incorporating, the methodologies of victory, because after all, they did win. They did push out the Ukrainians, the NATO-trained Ukrainians, the NATO-equipped Ukrainians. And when I say NATO-trained and NATO-equipped, that means that the American and South Korean troops that would take on North Korea are trained and equipped in the same manner. Now, they're talking about sending, it depends on what rumor you want to hear, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, who knows, to the Voronezh region. Again, to, I guess, beef up this region. But I imagine that the North Koreans aren't sending troops to Russia just to sort of hang around. I would think that we're probably looking at a new offensive direction into Ukraine coming up, one that the Ukrainians aren't ready for because the North Koreans are very good. North Korea has already deployed a missile brigade of around 90 men, 6 launchers, up to 120 missiles, the equivalent of Iskander M's, have been sent in. And these aren't battlefield support weapons. These missiles are being incorporated into the Russian strategic air campaign being waged against the defense industrial infrastructure of Ukraine. The Ukrainians have already forensically examined missile debris from several earlier strikes and have determined that the missiles used were indeed North Korean missiles. So the North Koreans are plugging into what appears to be the totality of the conflict, which means one cannot exclude the possibility that North Korean troops could also be dispatched to the Donbass or to Novorossiya, Zaporizhia, Kherson at some point. What we do know is that this is reflective of, the reality that rather than seeking to, gear down, to slow down, to create the potential for negotiations and negotiated into this conflict, Russia is instead doubling down and has decided this war ends on the battlefield. And North Korea is only too happy to participate. As I said, the benefits of this are considerable. Already, the United States and South Korea are panicking. Let's just think about the following calculus. The North Koreans beat the NATO-trained, NATO-equipped Ukrainian army. The NATO-trained and NATO-equipped Ukrainian army has defeated NATO forces and American forces in force-on-force military exercises because the Ukrainians incorporate the lessons of drone warfare. The Russians are beating the Ukrainians because Russian drone warfare is superior to Ukrainian drone warfare. And the North Koreans are fighting alongside the Russians, learning the tactics that are successfully defeating Ukrainians on the battlefield. You don't have to be too much of a mathematician to unravel this algorithm. What it means is that if North Korea faces the United States on the field of battle, the betting should be on North Korea because their training is better, their experience is better, and they have relevant combat experience that the United States simply lacks. Now, there are people who will complain that this is just horrific on the part of North Korea. How dare North Korea go to Russia and help the Russians out? I mean, this has expanded the scope and scale of the war. It's internationalized the conflict, as if the Ukrainians don't have foreigners fighting for them by the thousands or tens of thousands, as if they don't have active duty forces from a variety of NATO members and other nations, advising them on the front lines. The British have basically taken over Odessa, British Special Forces, and we know that American Special Forces and other special forces from Europe are actively advising Ukrainian forces. It's not as though the United States has, been providing, logistics. How dare the North Koreans use the Russians bring in North Korean missiles? Well, what about all the French, British, and American missiles that the Ukrainians bring in? What about all the American and French aircraft that the Ukrainians bring in, all the artillery pieces? Hell, the entire Ukrainian military today is composed of European and American equipment. Their direct involvement. The North Koreans are providing the Russians with artillery. My God, artillery shells. It's not as if we're not doing the same thing. So the hypocrisy has to come to an end. This war was internationalized a long time ago. And you can't blame North Korea for wanting to get involved, to get that combat experience. And you say, well, what did Europe ever do to North Korea? I don't know. NATO's been talking for years about setting up an office in Japan so that NATO can expand into the Pacific to help the United States contain North Korea and China. They're not innocent partners here. They're, NATO is a very aggressive entity. Europe is aggressive, anti-North Korean. And the North Koreans have just decided that they're not going to live a life in isolation. And they've decided they're going to stand up and defend themselves. And one of the best ways to defend themselves is to get relevant combat experience, which they are getting. People say this is prohibitively expensive. I mean, if you read the propaganda, people are talking about, 2,000, 2,300, 3,000 North Korean dead. I don't know. If you go to the memorial, Kim Jong-un has been open that there were casualties. 101 photographs were displayed in the opening ceremony, additional 250 photographs are brought in. Some people say there's some crossover. I'm not sure of that. We know that 9 additional North Korean soldiers have lost their lives in demining operations in Kursk, an ongoing effort. And in the massive memorial that has been built to honor those North Koreans who served in Kursk, a cemetery capable of holding around 420 bodies has been built. This seems to be more of an honest reflection of the losses suffered by North Korea. Significant, but not the numbers that the West is trying to do, which once again points to the fact that the North Koreans are very good at what they do, very effective at what they do, and are capable of defeating, all enemies put in front of them. Anyways, that's been my my rant. Next time an idea crosses my mind, I'll be sure to let you know.
Revolutionary salute to our queen, Lala. Go harder for the 250 Jews to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. I absolutely appreciate the love, queen. Salute.
Go to Google right now and type in the most repressed country in the world. Most probably, the top result will be North Korea. And for decades, North Korea didn't just earn that title, it owned it. International index reports score its political rights at a literal 0. And its economic freedom rank sits at the very bottom of global lists. It became infamous as an underdeveloped, deeply impoverished kingdom, isolated from global trade, cut off from modern technology, and ruled by strict state policies that dictated almost every aspect of daily life. In fact, the world got a terrifying visual proof of this poverty from space. When NASA took nighttime satellite photographs of East Asia, the contrast was shocking. To the south, South Korea glowed like a neon island of lights. To the north, China blazed with massive industrial hubs. But right in the middle, North Korea sat as a complete pitch black void. The country was so impoverished, so energy starved that it didn't even have enough electricity to keep the lights on at night. For 30 years, we assumed that void would stay dark forever, until recently, when an official economic report came out that left almost everyone in total shock. According to verified statistical data compiled by South Korea's central bank, the Bank of Korea, which tracks the North using remote sensing, satellite data, and trade intelligence, North Korea's economy posted its fastest economic growth rates in nearly a decade, jumping by 3.1%, followed by a 3.7% expansion. While major global economies battle inflation, heavy manufacturing inside North Korea grew by over 10% in a single year, and its construction sector surged by more than 12%. The lights inside defense factories are burning late into the night. Heavy machinery is running around the clock, and massive skyscraper projects are rising across Pyongyang. But how is Kim Jong-un pulling this off? Where is the massive rush of money coming from? And most importantly, is North Korea actually getting richer, or are we watching one of the most dangerous economic illusions in modern history? Let's understand the blueprint behind it. To understand where North Korea's new wealth is coming from, you have to look thousands of miles away to the battlefields of Eastern Europe. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Moscow expected a quick victory. Instead, the war turned into a long, grinding war of attrition. Both sides began burning through conventional military ammunition, specifically artillery shells and rockets, at a speed the world had not seen since the Second World War. Russia's domestic defense factories simply could not keep up with the overwhelming demand from the front lines. Vladimir Putin needed massive stockpiles of weapons, and he needed them immediately. He had very few places to turn, though. Enter Kim Jong-un. For more than 70 years, North Korea has lived under a state ideology known as Songun, or military first. While neighboring Asian economies spent their money building roads, consumer electronics, and public infrastructure, North Korea transformed itself into a giant underground weapons factory. It constructed vast facilities filled with artillery rounds, rockets, and missile systems. In late 2023 and mid-2024, Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin signed a historic mutual defense partnership. In exchange for weapons, Russia opened its massive financial and energy reserves to Pyongyang. The numbers behind the deal are massive. Joint investigations by intelligence agencies and think tanks estimate that North Korea has delivered over 5 million artillery shells to Russia, along with hundreds of KN-23 short-range ballistic missiles and long-range rocket systems. On top of that, North Korea deployed over 10,000 Special Forces soldiers and military engineers to directly support Russian operations. Ukrainian officials reported that North Korean shells made up roughly half of all artillery fired by Russian forces during major offensives. According to estimates from South Korean intelligence, this military assistance generated between $7 billion and nearly $14 billion for the North Korean government. To understand how massive that number is, you have to look at the size of North Korea's entire economy. The United Nations and South Korea's central bank estimate that North Korea's total annual gross domestic product is at around $25 to $26 billion. That means arms sales and military deployments to Russia generated foreign income equal to more than half of North Korea's entire annual economic output. Furthermore, Russia is not just paying in cash. Russian tankers have been delivering refined oil and fuel directly to North Korean ports, completely bypassing United Nations sanctions. Moscow has also shipped hundreds of thousands of tons of wheat and grain to help stabilize North Korea's chronic food shortages. Behind the scenes, Russian engineers are sharing advanced military technology, helping Pyongyang improve its satellite launch systems, drone technology, and submarine capabilities. Decades of Western sanctions were designed to starve the Kim regime of cash and force him to give up his nuclear weapons. Instead, a major global conflict provided Kim Jong-un with the most lucrative financial lifeline his country has seen in 30 years.
It could be that there will be North Koreans coming in to fight on Ukrainian territory. That is possible because Moscow is saying that the war has changed and essentially is now an all-out war and a war against NATO. No longer is Ukraine seen as the independent, force against Russia. So in that context of the new definition of what the war is all about, it could be North Koreans will be introduced to fight to help the Russians in this big push if they do go for a knockout blow against Ukraine in the coming months. That is possible. So the only neighbor that Russia has, which is cooperating in a real way, and not just in a symbolic way, diplomatically, for example, to help Russia in its fight against Ukraine, is North Korea.
While weapons sales to Russia made the biggest international headlines, there is a second engine driving North Korea's economic expansion: raw materials, particularly a critical metal called tungsten. Tungsten is one of the densest and hardest metals on the planet. It has the highest melting point of all known elements. Because it can withstand extreme heat and pressure, tungsten is absolutely essential for modern industry. It is used to make armor-piercing ammunition, missile casings, aircraft engines, industrial drill bits, and advanced microchips. Without tungsten, high-tech defense manufacturing comes to a complete standstill. China currently controls around 80% of the world's tungsten supply. As trade tensions between China and Western nations grew tighter, Beijing began restricting its exports of rare earths and critical metals to protect its own industries. That restriction caused global tungsten prices to jump by over 200%. Sitting right across the border from China is North Korea, which is home to some of the largest undeveloped tungsten reserves in the entire world. China has always been North Korea's largest trading partner, accounting for over 80 to 90% of its total trade volume. When global metal prices surged, North Korea's mining sector went into overdrive. Data from the Bank of Korea shows that North Korean mining output expanded by 8.8% in 2024 alone. Raw ores, coal, and heavy metals poured across the border into Chinese smelting facilities. For years, North Korea's primary legal export to China consisted of low-cost consumer items like human hair wigs and false eyelashes assembled in North Korean workshops. Today, heavy industrial ores and mineral products have reclaimed the top spot.
So for China, how important are these mineral resources like tungsten that you've mentioned coming from North Korea?
Now, because of the sanction from the United Nations, but there's still some loophole. Tungsten is important for military users and non-military users, for those vital industrial users. And so the tight control and the supply of tungsten between the North Korea and China could protect the China domestic manufacturing sector, and also use it as a bargaining power with the West, because China and North Korea altogether control around 80 to 90% of the global supply of tungsten.
So what happens when an isolated government suddenly finds itself with billions of dollars in new revenues? If you walk through the streets of the capital city, Pyongyang, the physical changes are impossible to miss. For decades, Pyongyang was defined by aging Soviet-style concrete blocks, quiet streets, and frequent power cuts. But recently, Kim Jong-un launched a massive nationwide construction initiative known as the 20x10 Regional Development Policy. The goal of this program is to build modern factories, regional hospitals, and housing units in 20 local counties every single year for the next decade. In Pyongyang itself, evidence of new spending is absolutely everywhere. The government built entire new skyscraper districts, such as the Hwasong and Sadong housing projects, adding tens of thousands of modern apartments designed for government officials, military officers, and defense technicians. Satellite data shows that North Korea's construction sector grew by a massive 12.3% in 2024. Residents in Pyongyang are increasingly seen carrying state-sanctioned smartphones connected to a national intranet network. Foreign observers and defectors report seeing more Chinese-made electric vehicles, taxi services, coffee shops, and even specialized pet stores operating in high-end neighborhoods. To anyone watching state television broadcasts, it looks like North Korea is finally entering a new era of modernization and prosperity. The government showcases images of brightly lit streets, automated factory floors, and modern housing blocks. However, this bright facade hides a much darker economic reality. In economics, there is a concept known as a K-shaped recovery. This happens when the wealthiest segment of a society experiences rapid income growth, while the rest of the population drops deeper into economic stress. In North Korea, this gap has stretched wider than ever before. While Kim Jong-un uses war profits to build high-rise apartments for elites in Pyongyang, daily life for ordinary citizens in the rural countryside is actually getting worse. There are three major reasons why this economic boom is failing the general population. First, severe domestic inflation. The sudden inflow of foreign cash and government spending has distorted the local economy. On the private black market, the North Korean won has lost significant value, driving up the cost of basic household staples like rice, corn, and cooking oil. For ordinary families who do not work in state weapons factories or defense construction, basic survival has become noticeably more expensive. Second, a declining agricultural sector. While heavy industry and construction expanded rapidly, North Korea's agricultural production actually shrank by 1.9% in the year 2024. A combination of severe weather events, chronic shortages of chemical fertilizers, and old machinery means that food security outside the capital remains extremely fragile. Third, and most importantly, the systematic destruction of private markets. During the devastating famines of 1990s, North Korea's state-run food distribution system completely collapsed. To survive, ordinary citizens, led mostly by women, created informal, grassroots street markets known as jangmadan. People traded homegrown vegetables, basic clothing, and smuggled Chinese goods. These private markets saved millions of lives. Over 30 years, they grew into a bottom-up capitalist economy that operated right under the government's nose, giving ordinary citizens a rare degree of financial independence from the state. Now that Kim Jong-un has billions of dollars pouring in from arms deals and mineral trade, he no longer needs these private markets. Over the past 3 years, the regime has launched an aggressive crackdown on private enterprise. The government has passed strict laws forcing people to buy grain only from state-owned food shops at fixed prices, criminalizing private food sales. Authorities have placed heavy restrictions on private transport, limited the use of personal mobile phones, and increased punishments for anyone trading unauthorized foreign goods. The ruling regime is not using its war windfall to open up the country, reform the economy, or improve standard living conditions. Instead, it is using its new wealth to completely crush private enterprise and re-establish 100% state control over every aspect of daily life. For nearly 30 years, international diplomacy with North Korea operated on one basic assumption. If global sanctions were strict enough, the country would eventually run out of money, forcing the Kim regime to negotiate and give up its nuclear weapons program in exchange for economic aid. That assumption no longer reflects reality. North Korea has proven that it does not need Western trade, foreign investment, or international aid packages to keep its economy afloat. By connecting itself directly to a growing bloc of heavily sanctioned nations, Kim Jong-un has built a self-sustaining wartime economy. What do you think about this? Do let us know.
Brother, a European MP murders other European on a speech about Africa. You know, I always say that brotherhood has nothing to do with skin color. Just because you're black does not necessarily mean you brothers. Yeah, brotherhood has to be proven. It's not because you're born in the same country that you're necessarily brother either. Please listen to this guy.
Right, I get the feeling you're a bit salty about being kicked out, about having been kicked out of the Sahel, right? And everything is starting to make a bit more sense to me, because I was wondering, in Belgium, in France, we keep producing, buying military equipment for billions of euros that was designed specifically to be used in the Sahel. I thought to myself, that's weird, because we're told we need to defend ourselves from Russia, but we're buying this specialized military equipment for Africa. We're going to squeeze our pensions, our hospitals, our schools to do this. I found that weird. I wondered why, and I went and looked. I understood that the Sahel region, in fact, has emerged in recent years as one of the most important mining corridors in Africa. Burkina Faso is one of the largest gold producers in Africa, but also has copper, zinc, manganese, phosphite. Mali will soon become the second largest African producer of lithium. Niger obviously holds hundreds of thousands of tons of uranium. And for years, decades, European companies have had cheap access to all these resources, all this wealth. The result is plundered countries and extreme poverty for their populations. And now you're afraid of losing this access. But instead of always wanting to interfere, of always waging war, because we saw with the destruction of Libya what that led to, let's instead help these countries with everything we can to support their sovereign development. Thank you.
This is some crazy stuff, isn't it? You wouldn't expect anything like this from the European Union. Well, now you have it. So the man's name is Mark Botenga. Yes, Botenga sounds African, doesn't it? Okay. So Botenga is a member of the Parliament of Europe. He's from Belgium. He was criticizing the European Union, and he pointed a finger specifically at French people, saying, you look very bitter, very salty, because you don't have any influence in the Sahel. This is the Sahel. The Sahel is these countries. You have Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad. And France has lost complete control of the Sahel. They used to control that area very much. So when he speaks here, he talks about the weapons that Europeans were buying. Europe came up with a goal, saying, you know what, let's be free. Let's buy our own weapons so we can protect ourselves. Since Donald Trump is a little bit pushy, he wants to order and push you left, right, center. How about we rebuild our own army? Let's play again so you can hear.
Right, I get the feeling you're a bit salty about being kicked out, about having been kicked out of the Sahel, right? And everything is starting to make a bit more sense to me, because I was wondering, in Belgium, in France, we keep producing, buying military equipment for billions of euros that is destined, that was designed specifically to be used in the Sahel. I thought to myself, that's...
Imagine. So France, Belgium are producing and buying weapons supposedly to protect themselves, Europeans. You know, since Russia started the war in Ukraine, Europe is afraid because America doesn't want to protect the way it used to. So Europe must look after itself. But the truth is, why are we producing and buying specifically weapons that are used in spaces like Sahel? These are weapons and trucks and elements that works well in the Sahel. Let's continue.
It's weird because we're told we need to defend ourselves from Russia, but we're buying this specialized military equipment for Africa. We're going to squeeze our pensions, our hospitals, our schools.
We're squeezing our pension, our money, because this stuff is actually for Africa. This equipment is not for Europe.
To do this. I found that weird. I wondered why. And I went and looked. I understood that the Sahel region, in fact, has emerged in recent years.
Okay, so they've spent 6 billion euros to produce and buy these weapons. Let's continue.
Years as one of the most important mining corridors in Africa. Burkina Faso is one of the largest gold producers in Africa, but also has copper, zinc, manganese, phosphite.
You need all that stuff for the future, for AI, for missiles, for cars, for everything, you know, in technology. Let's continue.
Mali will soon become the second largest African producer of lithium. Niger obviously holds hundreds of thousands of...
Okay, so uranium, you know, is very necessary for the atomic bomb, for medical stuff, for electricity, and many other things. He spoke about Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. You know, these countries. These countries have something in common. One, they speak French. Two, they've been colonized by the French. Three, they kicked out the French. Okay, so France has lost influence. Therefore, they are also all three fighting one thing. What is it? Terrorism. So are these weapons going to terrorists in these countries so they can destabilize the country? Why? To enable the French and the Europeans to get back into the Sahel. Let's continue.
Tons of uranium. And for years, decades, European companies have had cheap access to all.
So they've had cheap access to these resources for many, many years. One example, Niger used to produce a lot of uranium for France. France took exclusive access to Niger uranium, where they paid cheap. Basically, they paid $0.80 for 1 kilogram of Nigerian uranium. Not even $1, 0.80. But for the same quality of uranium in Canada, they paid $80. So $80 for the Canadians and 0.80 for the African. Now they don't have that access anymore. Let's continue.
All these resources, all this wealth, the result is plundered countries and extreme poverty for their populations. And now you're afraid of losing this access. But instead of always wanting to interfere, of always waging war, because we saw with the destruction of Libya what that...
They went to Libya and destroyed. You know, Libya wasn't interested in playing that stupid game with them. Libya had a lot of oil with Gaddafi, this man right here, very smart. They accused him of being a dictator. 2, they accused him of killing his own people. 3, they brought democracy to Libya. Democracy completely destroyed Libya. That was one of the most successful countries in the world. No need to pay hospitals in Libya. No need to pay for schooling in Libya. If you have a disease that needs to be treated, brain, whatever disease, you need treatment in Switzerland, Libya will give money to you and your family members to go with you in Switzerland to get treated for free. But they brought democracy to Libya. Let's continue.
Let's instead help these countries with everything we can to support their sovereign development. Thank you.
That's what it is, my brother. This man is speaking the truth. And this is not the first time he's spoken many, many times against the West. Listen to me again.
You're a very privileged man, Mr. Ambassador of the United States. I think you're representing about the only country that could openly threaten the sovereignty of European nations and still receive a red carpet treatment here. You've threatened us with tariffs. You've threatened to take...
You see that sarcasm, unbelievable.
Over Greenland, you even now repeated that we should change some of our laws. In the first year, let's say, the United States have violated an impressive amount of international rules. 8 countries, I think, you bombed in a year. You're now preparing to bomb Iran again, apparently. President Trump is saying who should govern Iraq and so on. Do you consider that the United States are still bound by international law and the UN Charter?
Crazy stuff, crazy stuff. Listen.
High Representative Callas, you speak about a balanced approach. But balanced on what? On war crimes? On genocide? On the killing of 15 humanitarian workers?
Here again, he's talking about the country you don't name. You know the country you don't name that country. Let's continue.
On mass graves, on the killing of children? And what would that balance be exactly? Some nice words for the Palestinians? More weapons for Israel? That is not balance. That is complicity in genocide. You would never, in face of Russian war crimes in Ukraine, I have never heard you speak about a balanced approach. There's 40 EU sanction regimes and not one on Israel that stands accused in front of the International Court of Genocide. ICC asks the arrest of Netanyahu and yet no EU sanctions. Stop this complicity now, adopt sanctions. Palestinians need acts, not words. These empty words, they have not saved one single Palestinian children.
The situation in Mozambique is getting out of hand, ladies and gentlemen. We all know that an unusual situation has been developing in that country over the last decade. These armed groups, the same kind of Islamic jihadists that have been waging war against the Alliance of Sahel States in West Africa. They are not just operating in West Africa. They are not only in West Africa. These guys are spreading across Africa right now. And especially whenever a new natural resource is discovered somewhere on this continent, these guys, they magically appear. It is a pattern we have been seeing across Africa for decades. Now, last month in my last episode that I made about Mozambique, I told you how Russia decided to enter the equation because Europe has been playing a very dangerous game in that country. They have been using Paul Kagame's army, the Rwandan army, to secure their oil and gas interest, their natural gas interest in the country. You know, whenever a natural wealth is discovered in Africa, just like vultures, the moment natural gas was discovered in Cabo Delgado, European companies, American companies, they all came and started exploring almost immediately. And just like that, these armed groups appeared and they started doing what they do, displacing people and causing chaos, which has led to about 1.5 million people being displaced in the country right now. It is happening, ladies and gentlemen. And the latest development is the reason for this episode. A special report from the United Nations is now telling the government of Daniel Chapo that he cannot win this war. That is what they are telling him right now. They're telling him to negotiate with these armed groups. They are saying that a military victory over these fighters does not appear to be possible at the
Revolutionary salute to Miss B's 99 for the 10 jewels to the war chest. Revolution is way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. Salute.
At the moment, and that negotiation should now be considered as the way out of this trouble. That is the current situation on the ground right now. So how did we get to this point? How did we get to a point where a UN special report is recommending negotiation with armed groups that have beheaded civilians? Because we all know the universal doctrine when it comes to this kind of non-state actors. You do not negotiate with them. America preaches it as a doctrine. Every government in this world, at least, they claim they will not negotiate with terrorists. Yet we are seeing special reports from the UN openly telling an African country that after 9 years of fighting, that the only realistic way out may be to negotiate with the same fighters that have killed thousands and thousands of people and displaced millions. So in this episode, I'm going to tell you what has been happening in Mozambique since I made my last episode and what happened to the offer by Russia to deploy their military and help Mozambique solve this problem. In my last episode, I told you that Russia made an offer. They saw an opening. They saw a situation where their presence could jeopardize the interest of Europe. And they want to use one stone to kill two birds. They are telling Mozambique, let us help you solve this problem. And then again, geopolitics will happen. Europe will be screwed. Now, has Chapo accepted Russia's offer? What did Chapo do about that offer? And what has Chapo been doing to solve this problem? Why Russia waits for their answer? That's exactly what we are going to talk about in this episode. But first, I want to welcome you once again to Frontline Africa. And I also want to congratulate myself and everyone else who has been part of this journey. I am happy to announce to you that we have finally crossed 100,000 subscribers on this channel, which is a significant milestone. I did not do it alone. A lot of people believe in what I do in this channel. And with your support, we have been able to come this far. And believe me, this is only the beginning because Frontline Africa will open for business soon enough. A lot of things I have been holding back, like membership or trying to monetize by seeking sponsorship and every other thing that normal channels do. I have not been doing it because I told myself that if I don't get to 100,000 subscribers, I will not open membership. I believe I have to earn it first before I will do it. But at this point, I want to agree that I have earned it. And before the end of this month, Frontline Africa will open for business. We will start our live streaming. We will open membership for people to support what we do on this channel. And you will see me in other Pan-African channels collaborating. Essentially, Frontline Africa is open for business, and you are going to see better reporting, more in-depth analysis, because at this point, I know a lot is demanded from me, not just to report. I need to do more than I am already doing right now. This is what these 100,000 subscribers mean for me personally. So if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, join this movement, support what we do here, subscribe to this channel, and also ring that notification bell. Now let me take you back to July 9, when Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, traveled to Maputo, the capital of Mozambique, and announced that Russia was ready to help Mozambique fight the insurgency that is tearing through Cabo Delgado and the northern province, where all of that natural gas is being explored as I speak. That announcement came at a time when European funding for Rwanda's deployment in Mozambique have collapsed because of the sanctions and the accusations against Rwanda over what has been happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in that episode, I told you something very important. I said Mozambique has not said yes to Russia's offer yet, as at when I shot that video. And Mozambique has not said no either. I promise you I will come back to this story when something changed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, something significant has changed. And a lot has been happening, but it is not what many people expected. So I will start with the first question. The question everybody has been asking in the comment section: has Mozambique accepted Russia's offer? As of the time I am recording this episode, the answer is still no, ladies and gentlemen. At least not in the sense of Russian soldiers fighting inside Cabo Delgado or deploying their military to fight these non-state actors. It has not happened yet. There is no public announcement to that effect. None of it that Mozambique has agreed to a deployment of Russian combat troops or the Africa Corps into the northern province of Mozambique. And you need to understand how Lavrov's offer was worded, because the kind of words that the Russian foreign minister used matters. Russia said it was prepared to respond if Mozambique requested assistance. It was a conditional offer. So this is the honest status of Russia's offer. Russia made the offer good and fine. Mozambique has not officially accepted it. Mozambique has not even rejected it either. The offer still stands, and Russia is waiting. But while Russia was waiting, President Daniel Chapo, he did something that tells you everything about how Mozambique is handling this situation. In July, shortly after Russia's offer, Chapo traveled to Portugal on an official visit. And while he was in Lisbon, he asked Portugal, which is their former colonial master, also the country that is leading the European Union's military mission in Mozambique, they asked Portugal to mobilize European support for an extension of that mission by at least 2 more years. So shortly after Russia offered to help Mozambique, the president of Mozambique flew to Europe and asked the Europeans to stay even longer. He's not telling them to leave, he's telling them to stay even longer. And let me give you the details of that European mission inside Mozambique, because a lot of people don't even know that mission exists. It is called the European Union Military Assistance Mission. The European Council extended their mandate until December 31st of this year, 2026. And they allocated about 3 million euros for the mission's common cost for the second half of the year. Now, since September of 2024, that mission has run more than 40 training programs involving more than 1,000 Mozambican soldiers, focusing on Mozambique's quick reaction forces, their logistics, their maintenance, and the ability of the Mozambican army to eventually stand on their own and tackle this insurgency according to anyhow they want to do it. So essentially, it's a training program that the European Union is offering Mozambique. And when Chapo made this request in Portugal, in Lisbon, he connected Mozambique's security directly to global energy security, or should I say, Europe's energy security. He is telling the Europeans that helping Mozambique fight this insurgency is not charity, that European gas interest is inside Mozambique, that European companies are operating in Cabo Delgado. If Cabo Delgado burns, European energy interests also burn alongside it. So let me correct something that has been circulating in public discussions. And I want you to hear this very clearly. Europe actually stopped funding Rwanda's deployment in Mozambique. Europe did not withdraw their entire security involvement from Mozambique. Those are two different things. The money for Kagame's soldiers, it has stopped. They no longer fund Kagame's operation inside Mozambique. The European training mission is what is continuing. And Mozambique now wants it extended into 2028, which brings us to Rwanda. Because a lot of people assume that when European money stopped funding Paul Kagame's army inside Mozambique, that Rwandan soldiers withdrew. That did not happen, ladies and gentlemen. Rwanda has not left Mozambique. Their soldiers, which is more than 6,000 of them, they are still in Cabo Delgado. What happened is what I reported in my earlier episode on this story. Mozambique itself found a way to keep funding Paul Kagame's mission in his country. In May, Rwanda's foreign minister announced that Mozambique has secured funding to continue the Rwandan military operation, and that Mozambique is now paying for that deployment directly. Now, how much, from where, and for how long, those details have not been fully disclosed. The arrangement between Mozambique and Rwanda remains opaque. There is not a lot of information about it. And Kagame himself has previously put the cost of this kind of operation at around $100 million a year. But the essential point is simple. The European funding pipeline to Rwanda has broken, and Rwandan deployment did not stop because of that cutting of funding. So look at what Mozambique's security architecture looks like right now. Rwandan soldiers are on the ground, now paid by Mozambique, at least on paper. That is what we have been told. European trainers and advisors are working with the Mozambican army. Russia is supplying equipment and training with an offer of deploying their Africa Corps into the country itself in order to fight it head on. And Mozambique's own armed forces being rebuilt in the middle of all of it. It is all happening at the same time. Mozambique is hedging, ladies and gentlemen. At least that is how I understand the situation. Daniel Chapo is refusing to turn Cabo Delgado into a simple Russia versus West contest. He is collecting partners the way other leaders collect enemies. And why is everybody so interested in this one province? Because it's not the entire country. It is just one particular province. I can say you already know the answer to that question, but let me give you the current numbers because the stakes have grown since my last episode on this story. Now, in January, Total Energies of France formally restarted their $20 billion Mozambique LNG project after 5 years of force majeure. 5 years of that project being frozen because of the violence, with about 4,000 workers now mobilized back at the Afungi site. The target is first gas to be produced in 2029. And Chapo has said that the project could ultimately generate up to $35 billion for the Mozambican economy. Next to it, we have the ExxonMobil-led LNG project. The American giant, they are moving towards construction. And Italy's Eni is pushing ahead offshore. Now, in June, a major engineering contract was also announced for Eni's Coral North floating gas project. So it is Western companies mining and exploring in northern Mozambique. So let me count the people that are inside Mozambique right now. We have France through their Total Energies. We also have the United States through the ExxonMobil. We also have Italy through Eni. Rwanda with their soldiers, the European Union with a military mission, and Russia with equipment, training, and an open offer. All of them converging on one African country, and specifically on one northern province where armed groups happens to be operating, and also where this natural gas was discovered. So it is convergence of interest happening right now in one country. But why the big powers are positioning themselves? What is actually happening on the ground? Because that is the part, the investors, they will not like to talk about it. The fighters have not disappeared. On July 12th, the very same day I posted my previous episode on this story, attacks and the fear of attacks in parts of the country forced hundreds of people to run from their homes. Then look at the month of June. According to UN's own humanitarian reporting on northern Mozambique, 73 security incidents happened in a single month, up from 71 in May of this year. 44 of those incidents involve violence against civilians. 10 civilians and more were killed. 72 people were adopted. They were taken for forced recruitment, forced labor, or ransom. We saw a lot of villages being attacked and shops looted, houses burned, and communities intimidated and taxed by these armed groups. And conflict monitors who track this war, they are describing something militarily significant about how these fighters now operate. They are not trying to capture a provincial capital and hold it like we are seeing in the Sahel and some parts of West Africa. They have broken into smaller dispersed cells that move between coastal communities, roads, and mining areas. They kidnap for ransom. They extort traders. They mount roadblocks. They plant explosives, and they tap into the informal mining economy to keep their operations going. And in some areas, they have gone even further, preaching in communities, operating checkpoints, collecting taxes, and attempting to control how people live in that province. Cabo Delgado is no longer only a battlefield. It is becoming a competition over who governs the spaces where the state is very weak, who provides security, who controls the roads, who collect taxes, and who will ultimately recruit more young men to fight on their side. It is a carbon copy, almost, of what we are witnessing in the Sahel. And that is exactly why this war has lasted for 9 years, almost a decade. You can defeat a conventional army by capturing their headquarters. It is much harder to destroy a movement, an armed insurgency that fragments into small cells, disappears into the bush, funds itself through ransom and smuggling, and refuses to give you a big target to bomb. Since 2017, this conflict has killed more than 6,000 people, including about 3,000 civilians. This is according to the conflict data cited in the UN report. About 1.5 million people have been displaced by this conflict. 1.7 million people needed humanitarian assistance this year alone. After 9 years and 4 different armies, this insurgency is still alive. Which brings us to the man whose report triggered this episode. His name is Professor Ben Saw. He's actually a UN Special Rapporteur, an independent expert whose mandate covers how government protect human rights while they are fighting insurgency. Now, from August 4 to 14, he was inside Mozambique on an official visit. He met government ministers in Maputo, the military command and the police, the intelligence service, and then he traveled to Cabo Delgado itself, where he met with the governor, district administrators, and displaced people, and also victims of this violence. And at the end of that visit, he released the findings that made headlines across the whole of Africa. Saw's 3 findings are very simple. His recommendations and findings are very simple. Attacks on civilians have increased in frequency and scale over the past year. The soldiers are practicing what he calls offensive defense. They are holding ground and guarding key areas instead of pursuing these fighters, which calms things down but gives these armed groups room to rebuild. And after 9 years of this war, a purely military victory does not appear to be possible. So Mozambique should now explore a negotiated settlement with this armed group. This is his recommendation, ladies and gentlemen. So understand what actually happened here. Ben Saw did not fly into Mozambique to convince the government to negotiate. The government of Mozambique had already been signaling a political pathway weeks before this man arrived. And that tells you what Mozambique's real strategy has become. It is not a question about picking Russia or pick Europe or let Rwanda finish the job. It is pressure plus containment plus development plus defections and possibly negotiation with these armed groups. They are all on the table. The goal is to stop the chaos, the crisis, the insurgency. That is the goal. Chapo is preparing his country for the possibility that no foreign army, Russian, European, or Rwandan, is going to simply wipe these fighters out of existence it is a possibility that they probably might not achieve military victory. And the biggest danger of all, if Mozambique negotiates, does that teach every armed group on this continent that if you kill enough people for long enough, the state will eventually come to you with an offer? But now, turn the question the other way around, because fairness demands it. If 9 years of military operations involving Mozambique's own army, SADC forces from Southern Africa, and more than 6,000 Rwandan soldiers and European military assistance, they have not been able to eliminate this insurgency, then what exactly is the alternative end game? Another 9 years, another 6,000, victims? That is the real debate here, ladies and gentlemen, not the lazy question of whether Mozambique should surrender to these armed groups. The real question is whether there is any ending to this war that does not eventually involve some form of political settlement. And this is where Mozambique connects to the bigger African picture I raised at the beginning of this episode. Because I told you that these groups are spreading across Africa. And I want to give you the honest data on that claim, because the honest data is frightening enough without any exaggeration. In 2025, researchers at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies counted about 24,000 deaths linked to militant Islamic groups all across Africa. That was an increase of 24% in a single year, alongside about 8,000 violent events, the highest number they have ever recorded. But this is the detail that matters. 98% of those deaths came from just 3 theaters: the Sahel, Somalia, and the Lake Chad Basin. So the violence is still heavily concentrated around West Africa. It has not yet reached every corner of Africa. And I will not tell you that it has gotten to that point, but if care is not taken, unfortunately, that could be a possibility. So let me put everything together, because this story has moved, and I want you to see clearly where it has moved to. 1 month ago, the question looked simple. Will Mozambique choose Russia or Europe? Today, the answer from Mozambique is Russia and Europe, and Rwanda and Mozambique's own army. All of them, they are all quietly preparing for the possibility that none of them can be able to deliver a military victory over this armed insurgency. Mozambique is refusing to choose one partner. Yes, Rwanda is still in the country. Now on Mozambique's own payroll, Mozambique is trying to fund their operation themselves. Europe is being asked to stay for 2 more years. Russia's offer is still on the table, with a security cooperation relationship already running underneath it. The gas projects are racing towards 2029, and both the president of Mozambique and an independent UN expert, they are now acknowledging in their different ways that military force alone may never finish this war. And maybe that is the deepest lesson in this story, not only for Mozambique, but for the whole of Africa. Whoever secures Cabo Delgado gains influence over a province holding tens of billions of dollars in natural gas. Every foreign power understands what is at stake, ladies and gentlemen. But what happens if African government finally discover that no foreign military partner, be it Russia, European, or even our African, Rwandan military force or American, can defeat an insurgency whose roots are already buried inside African communities? These guys, they did not fall from the sky. This insurgency, they are African citizens. They are people that look like us. Yes. How can Africa defeat this kind of people? Because at some point, the real solution has to be African solution, African intelligence, and African political will to fight this war. It has to be African development in the other places that this group feed on, the neglected villages, the jobless men that are available to be recruited. So this is where I will leave it with you, ladies and gentlemen, because we're going to continue this conversation in the comment section, as always. And you already know that the comment
WW3 self-propelled. A soldier is handed a rifle carved from wood, not in 1987, not in 1990, in 2021, while his country burns. Burkina Faso, thousands dead, over 1 million people running from their own homes, a quarter of the entire country no longer answering to its own government, and the men sent to stop it were training with sticks shaped like guns. Sit with that for 1 second, because 3 years later, that same country would be flying Chinese armor across its deserts, Turkish drones in its skies, a homegrown armored vehicle built by Burkinabe, hands rolling out in front of the world. What happened in between is one of the most extraordinary military transformations Africa has seen in this generation. And it started with a 34-year-old captain who almost didn't survive his own war. Stay with us, because by the end of this, you'll understand why capitals in Europe are holding emergency meetings about a country most people couldn't find on a map 3 years ago. This is the story of how Burkina Faso built an army from nothing and why the whole world is suddenly paying attention. Let's rewind. Before we talk about tanks and drones, we need to talk about the trap. Because Burkina Faso soldiers weren't unarmed by accident. They were unarmed by design. There's a regional rule in West Africa, a convention signed by ECOWAS back in 2006, built on an even older 1998 moratorium. The rule was simple on paper. No member state moves small arms and light weapons freely. Every transfer needs approval. The idea, in theory, was good. Stop weapons from flowing to warlords and rebels across borders. But here's the catch. If a government wanted to arm its own soldiers, it had to ask permission first. Send a formal request. List every weapon, every serial number, every supplier. Wait for it to circulate to other member states. Wait for no objections. Wait for a certificate. Meanwhile, terrorist networks armed by transnational smugglers weren't waiting for anybody's approval. While Ouagadougou filled out paperwork, insurgents in the north were being resupplied within days. This is the part most people never hear. A convention built to protect West Africa from illegal arms became, in practice, a cage that kept a legitimate government from defending its own people. And into that cage walked a young soldier who had already bled for his country once. His name is Ibrahim Traoré. Before the uniform, before the war, he was a student of geology at the University of Ouagadougou, graduated with honors in 2009. A young man who joined student associations, defended his classmates in disputes, and studied the ground beneath his country's feet, never knowing that ground would one day become his greatest weapon. That same year, he chose the army instead of a laboratory. He trained at the Georges Namoano Military Academy, sent to Morocco for anti-aircraft training, then deployed straight to Kaya, a frontline town in the north, where the insurgency was already tightening its grip. By 2014, he was a lieutenant. By 2015, he was serving with the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali, standing shoulder to shoulder with soldiers from across the region against the same enemy eating away at the Sahel. In 2018, during a major rebel assault in the Tombouctou region, he was cited for exceptional courage. In 2019, he fought in the Otapuano offensive, one counter-insurgency operation after another, each one chipping away at him. Look at his right hand. Look at the scars on his face. Those aren't decorations. Those are receipts. Paid in blood on the front lines for a war his own government kept underfunding. And somewhere in those years, something in him changed. He watched soldiers die holding equipment that should have been retired a decade earlier. He watched money meant for the front lines disappear into pockets far from any battlefield. He became, without asking for the role, the voice of frustrated soldiers in the north, men who had nothing left to lose because they had already lost everything. In January 2022, when a transition brought a new leader, Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba, to power, Traoré allowed himself to hope. Maybe now the soldiers get their weapons. Maybe now the front line gets the attention it's owed. 8 months passed. And what did the soldiers get? Not rifles, not reinforcements. They watched their new leader welcome back Blaise Compaoré, the very man linked to the killing of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary icon, a man whose name was, for millions of Burkinabe, synonymous with everything sold out, everything stolen, everything betrayed. While soldiers were bleeding in the north with wooden rifles still fresh in memory, a symbol of everything the nation had fought to bury was being welcomed home with open arms. Then came the convoy attack. 27 soldiers, 10 civilians, gone in a single ambush in the north. For men who had already buried too many brothers, this was the breaking point. On September 30th, 2022, with the backing of the Cobra Special Forces Unit, the movement to reclaim the country's direction began. 3 weeks later, on October 21st, 2022, Ibrahim Traoré stood before his country as interim president, 34 years old. the youngest head of state on the planet. His first words carried none of the polish of career politicians, only the weight of a man who had already watched too many friends die. We are confronted with a security and humanitarian crisis without precedent, he said. Our aim is nothing less than the reconquest of every inch of territory occupied by these hordes of terrorists. Burkina's existence is in danger. No ceremony, no time to waste, because the walls were already closing in. Here's where the story turns. Because taking power didn't open any doors, it slammed almost every single one shut. ECOWAS, the same bloc holding the arms exemption process hostage for years, condemned the transition outright. Sanctions followed. And with those sanctions came a threat that mattered more than any diplomatic statement. Cut off from ECOWAS approval, Burkina Faso couldn't legally import weapons. Full stop. Even if a supplier somewhere in the world was willing to sell, the shipment could be stopped at any port, any border crossing, any customs checkpoint across the bloc. The very mechanism meant to keep illegal weapons out of West Africa was now the mechanism keeping a government from arming its own defenders. And it didn't stop there. Most Western nations weren't interested in supplying Burkina Faso either. Not after Traoré severed ties with France and asked French troops to leave the country they had occupied for so long. Old partners became closed doors. Every traditional route to weapons blocked. Picture that for a second. You are the president of a country losing a quarter of its territory to terrorism. Your soldiers are dying with equipment older than some of them. And every single door the old world order built for you has just been slammed shut in your face.
When we say ECOWAS, it's actually the French who are there, who give the authorization to acquire certain weapons or not. We didn't want to go through that channel. So our transactions were also blocked with various arguments that don't hold up.
Most leaders in that position fold. Traoré didn't fold. He looked underground. Literally. Remember the geology degree? Remember the years spent studying what lies beneath Burkinabe soil? Gold. Burkina Faso's gold had been leaving the country for years, enriching companies abroad, while ordinary Burkinabe watched their national wealth disappear over the horizon. Traoré made a decision that stunned everyone watching. He stopped the gold from leaving. No exemption certificate, no export. Weeks passed. International mining companies, most of them Western, began pressuring their own governments. ECOWAS pressured Traoré to relent. The same old playbook. Squeeze the leader until he breaks. But this time, something different happened. The weapons arrived.
So here we are, the war is happening and we want drones, we want weapons, but we can't get them. And at that time, diplomats came to tell us that we had better change things because we wouldn't even be able to pay salaries by March. I said, there's no problem. So one day I had all gold production from all the mines blocked.
Burkina Faso's own mineral wealth, used for the very first time not to enrich a foreign boardroom, but to protect Burkinabe soldiers and Burkinabe villages. A nation's ground beneath its feet, finally working for the people standing on it.
I gathered everything and told the partner to come and collect the gold and send us our drones. That's what we did. Our drones came, they took their gold and they left. We need money, we need someone. So gold is important. People need gold and we need something in this world. Anyway, it's not a way of saying how people are going to handle things, but it does take courage. That's true.
This was the first crack in the cage, but it was only the beginning of what would follow. Now that the deadlock was broken, Traoré went looking for new partners. Not old colonial patrons dressed up as allies. Not anyone offering help with conditions attached. China answered first. Armored vehicles began arriving. CS/VP-14 mine-resistant vehicles. WZ-551 armored carriers. Then heavier systems still. Turkey followed, offering something that had already reshaped battlefields from Libya to Ukraine. The Bayraktar TB2 drone. Precision strike capability from the sky, something Burkina Faso's insurgents had never had to worry about before. And then came the meeting that made headlines around the world. Months into his presidency, Traoré traveled to St. Petersburg for the second Russia-Africa summit. He walked in wearing military fatigues, not a suit. A deliberate message. This was a war leader, not a diplomat playing dress-up. There, he sat across from Vladimir Putin. And Putin, according to reports, offered him Wagner Group fighters, foreign paramilitaries to help clean up the insurgency. Here's the moment that surprised everyone in that room. Traoré said no, not to cooperation with Russia, not to weapons, not to training, not to partnership, but to foreign boots doing the fighting for his people. The fight belongs to Burkina Faso's people, he said, and they will wage it to the end. Later, speaking on Burkinabe national television, he was even more direct. I am satisfied with our cooperation with Russia. But our soldiers fight alone. Reports of a foreign combat presence are intended to hurt Burkina Faso so that other countries will hesitate to work with us. Read between those lines for a second. He wasn't rejecting help. He was rejecting dependency. There is a difference between a partner and a patron. Traoré understood that difference better than most leaders twice his age. And what he built next would prove it. Because while Putin was offering foreign fighters, Traoré was already building something Wagner could never replace. An army made entirely of Burkinabe hands. There was already a foundation to build on. Back in 2019, under the previous government, a local self-defense militia had been formed, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, the VDP. For years, they were an afterthought, poorly armed, poorly trained, a backup plan, not a strategy. Traoré looked at that same organization and saw something else entirely. In his very first month in power, October 2022, the call went out. 50,000 new volunteers wanted. By late November, less than 2 months later, nearly 90,000 Burkinabe citizens had answered that call. Read that number again. 90,000 ordinary people, farmers, traders, students, choosing to stand up and defend their own villages because their country asked them to. Not everyone was retained. Not everyone completed training. But the message sent to the entire region was unmistakable. The Burkinabe people were not waiting to be saved. In November 2022, the government restructured the entire system, creating national-level volunteer units alongside the local ones already in place. A month later, in December, an entirely new law rebuilt the legal foundation these forces stood on. Under Traoré, the VDP transformed completely. Larger numbers, deeper integration with the regular army, public funding through a dedicated national support fund, better pay, disability benefits, death benefits for families who lost everything, even a formal medal of honor for those who served. Traoré has a name for what he built. He calls the VDP our Wagner, not because they are mercenaries, because they are the answer to the question every outside power kept trying to sell him. You don't need to import soldiers when your own people are willing to fight for their own soil. That's not a slogan. That's a fundamentally different theory of what an army even is. And it didn't stop at the volunteers. Before Traoré, foreign trainers ran the show. French special forces, European advisors, outsiders setting the curriculum, controlling the pace, deciding what Burkinabe soldiers were allowed to learn and when. Traoré ended that arrangement completely. He called it endogenization, a word that simply means we train our own on our own soil by our own people. Because think about what it means when a foreign power teaches your army everything it knows. They know your tactics before your enemies do. They know your weaknesses. And the moment they decide to leave, whether out of politics or convenience, they take that knowledge with them and leave you standing there with nothing. A nation that cannot train its own soldiers can never fully own its own defense. So the academy in Po, along with other training institutions across the country, began producing something Burkina Faso had never fully had before. Officers trained in Burkina Faso by Burkinabe instructors, using tactics built specifically for Burkinabe terrain and Burkinabe conditions. No more wooden rifles. Soldiers now trained on the very weapons they would carry into real combat. Every piece of this was moving in one direction, from dependency toward sovereignty, from asking permission toward building capacity. And the next piece would be the sharpest one yet. In November 2022, barely a month into his presidency, a decree created the first 6 battalions of what would become the backbone of Burkina Faso's entire war effort, the Rapid Intervention Battalion, the BIR. Their mission wasn't to sit behind walls and wait. It was to move fast, hit hard, and push as far forward as the fight demanded. This was a complete rejection of the old defensive posture. No more waiting for the insurgency to come to you. Go find it first. By May 2023, 6 battalions had become 12. By early 2025, that number had climbed past 28. In January 2025 alone, 3 new battalions were stood up in the most dangerous zones in the entire country. Arbinda in the north, Ugaru and Dayapaga in the east, places where the insurgency had once operated with near impunity. To support all of this growth, Burkina Faso's military recruited over 15,000 new soldiers in 2024 alone. 15,000 in a single year. This is not a country slowly rebuilding. This is a country sprinting. And in his 2024 New Year's address, Traoré went further still announcing a special rapid intervention brigade, a command structure built to bring the BIR battalions together with special forces units for coordinated operations far larger than anything a single battalion could pull off alone. In 2025, a Sahel expeditionary group followed, a dedicated force built specifically to fight in the epicenter of the entire regional insurgency, every layer built on the one before it. And by June 2025, the results were no longer theoretical. Burkina Faso's military reported reclaiming 72.7% of previously lost territory. Read that number one more time. A country that was losing of its land to terrorism just 3 years earlier had taken back nearly 3/4 of everything it had lost. That is not luck. That is not propaganda. That is the direct result of a plan that started with wooden rifles and ended with battalions numbering in the dozens. But even this wasn't the ceiling. Traoré was already looking further ahead. In April 2026, the government adopted a plan that would have sounded impossible back in 2022. A 100,000 strong military reserve by the end of the year, split into two categories. First, former soldiers, ex-police, and former volunteer fighters who could be mobilized instantly, ready to lead and train the next wave. Second, ordinary civilians receiving military and civic training through a new National Patriotic Service program. In May 2026, the Transitional Legislative Assembly voted unanimously to formalize the legal status of this reserve. The Minister of War, General de Division Celestin Simpore, stated plainly that he expects to reach 100,000 reservists before the year is out. If that number is reached, it repositions Burkina Faso as one of the most militarily capable nations anywhere in the Sahel or West Africa. Traoré put it simply. The context of security and geopolitics justifies the strengthening of defense capabilities and security sovereignty. But there's something deeper happening in that sentence. This isn't just about soldier counts anymore. This is a nation redefining what it means to be a citizen. Because under this vision, when the moment demands it, the entire nation becomes the army. Not soldiers protecting citizens from a distance. Citizens who are also soldiers, defending the only home they have. And Traoré's ambitions were never going to stop at Burkina Faso's own borders. In December 2025, he became the second president of the Alliance of Sahel States, the confederation binding Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger together. By the end of that same year, a unified force of 5,000 soldiers drawn from all three nations had been stood up, a combined military capable of crossing borders to chase the same enemy that had never respected those borders in the first place. Think about what that actually represents. For over a century, the borders across this region were drawn by colonial powers in rooms thousands of miles away, with no regard for the people who would live and die inside those lines. Now, for the first time in generations, three Sahelian nations are building something those old borders were never designed to allow: a shared army, a shared defense, a shared future. And according to reports that surfaced online, Traoré's ambitions may reach even further than that. A leaked document allegedly outlined an even larger vision, uniting the strongest armies on the entire continent under a single defense pact. A plan reportedly discussed in secret meetings with military leadership from across the region, aimed at ending Western military dependence for good and building a self-reliant African command structure from the ground up. When word of this leaked, it reportedly triggered urgent conversations inside NATO and no shortage of anxiety across European capitals. Think about that for a second. 3 years ago, soldiers in this country were training with sticks. Now, the mere rumor of what this leader might be building is enough to rattle military alliances an ocean away. That's not an accident. That's the direct, traceable result of every decision we've just walked through. But the story isn't only about receiving weapons from new partners. It's about what Burkina Faso started building with its own two hands. Through 2025 and into 2026, the re-equipment drive accelerated fast. In October 2025, a major shipment arrived carrying assault cannons, modular rocket launcher systems, and 120mm mortar systems for the Ministry of Defense. In August 2025, an even larger shipment landed. VN-22B fire support vehicles, built for mobility and firepower in the most intense engagements imaginable. PLL-05 self-propelled gun mortar systems, capable of both indirect artillery fire and direct engagement against infantry and light armor. SR-5 multiple rocket launch systems, able to fire both guided and unguided rockets, giving commanders precision or overwhelming firepower depending on what the moment demands. In February 2026, representatives from Chinese arms manufacturer Norinco and the Hong Kong-based Frontier Services Group arrived at the Lombila military base for a security assessment ahead of further equipment transfers, including armored personnel carriers. During that same visit, the delegation toured the nearby headquarters of Russian forces operating in the region, where officials reportedly agreed to coordinate joint training programs for Burkinabe officers and personnel. Analysts watching this closely describe it as a hybrid model. Chinese technology paired with Russian security cooperation, giving Sahelian nations a path to real defense capability without depending on the same Western institutions that spent decades treating this region as an afterthought. And there's a deeper layer underneath all of it. The same model already applied in Mali, supplying armored vehicles while simultaneously building local infrastructure to support mining, is now taking root here too. Defense cooperation increasingly tied to gold and lithium projects, resources this land has always had, finally being leveraged on Burkina Faso's own terms. Traoré has stated the long-term goal plainly: full industrial sovereignty. Weapons manufactured locally, under a slogan that says everything you need to know, made in Burkina. And in 2025, that slogan stopped being an aspiration and became something you could stand in front of and touch. At the SYSDEF Defense Exhibition in Ouagadougou, a Burkinabe company called BAT Equipments unveiled the country's first domestically designed and built armored personnel carrier. Not imported, not donated with conditions attached. Designed on Burkinabe soil by Burkinabe engineers for Burkinabe soldiers. The company itself is barely 3 years old, founded by Thierry Alain Belem Kouabga. Its first prototype sits at 99% completion, and it has already been tested live against real threats: automatic pistol fire, machine gun fire, up to PKM-class weapons. It held. Alongside it, Burkinabe engineers displayed something almost poetic in its simplicity. Ordinary pickup trucks, converted into protected fighting platforms, reinforced with armor plating and turrets, built specifically for the brutal, unforgiving terrain of the Sahel. Nobody handed them this technology. They built it themselves, out of what they had, because they understood their own battlefield better than any outside engineer ever could. And this matters for reasons that go far beyond a single armored vehicle. For generations, an entire continent was fed a quiet, persistent lie: that Africa could dig up the minerals, but never build the machines. That real technology only ever comes from somewhere else. That the natural order of things is to buy, never to make. Colonial systems were built specifically to enforce that arrangement. Keep the continent supplying raw material. Keep it a market for someone else's finished product. Never let it become a producer in its own right. Every rivet on that armored vehicle in Ouagadougou is a quiet rejection of that entire arrangement. And BAT Equipment isn't stopping at Burkina Faso's own borders either. The company is already exploring how to supply the wider alliance of Sahel states, meaning Mali and Niger too. The earliest seeds of a genuinely African defense industry, built by Africans for African terrain on African terms. Now step back and look at the full distance traveled. 6 BIR battalions became more than 28. A neglected auxiliary force from 2019 became a national defense network numbering over 90,000. Wooden training rifles became advanced Chinese armor and Turkish drones in the sky. Foreign-run training academies became Burkinabe institutions teaching Burkinabe tactics to Burkinabe officers. A nation that once had to beg for permission to import a single rifle is now building armored vehicles inside its own borders. This isn't a story about weapons. Not really. It's a story about what happens when a nation refuses to accept the role it was assigned. When a young captain who once studied the ground beneath his own country decided that ground would finally start working for the people standing on it. Because here's what Traoré said at that summit in St. Petersburg, words that have echoed far beyond that room. The questions my generation is asking are, how is Africa, with so much wealth on our soil, with generous nature, water, sunshine in abundance, how is Africa today the poorest continent? A slave who cannot assume his own revolt does not deserve to be pitied. We do not feel sorry for ourselves. We do not ask anyone to feel sorry for us. That's not a leader asking for sympathy. That's a generation refusing to wait for permission any longer. Burkina Faso is no longer a nation that begs for its own security. It is building its own army, forging its own weapons, writing its own future, one battalion, one volunteer, one homemade armored vehicle at a time. And if the pattern of the last 3 years continues, Burkina Faso won't just become the strongest army in the Sahel, it will become the blueprint. A living answer to that quiet lie so many were told for so long, that Africa could never build for itself. This is only the beginning of that answer. And across the continent, people are watching to see how the next chapter gets written. If this story moved you, stay close. Because what happens next across the alliance of Sahel states is going to reshape this entire region. And we're going to be right here telling that story as it unfolds.
In June, Algeria started digging a pipeline in the Sahara. In July, in Freetown, West African leaders signed for a different pipeline, one that goes the other way. Also, in that same July, Algeria and Mali sent their ambassadors back to each other after a year of silence. Then, from the 9th of August, 4 military helicopters lifted off from a small base in southern Algeria and flew into Niger. Those are 4 decisions happening within 10 weeks, and officially, none of them have something to do with each other, and nobody announced any of this. But put them on one calendar and something stops making sense. Now let's start with the helicopters. Algeria's defense ministry said President Tebboune ordered it 2 Mi-24V gunships, 2 Mi-17 transport helicopters, ammunition, spare parts, and maintenance gear. And that is a gift. It is free, and most people read it the same way. Algeria is apologizing. Because 16 months earlier, Algeria shot down a Malian drone. And that was on the 1st of April 2025 near Tinzoutin, right on the border. Now, Algeria said the drone crossed into its skies. Mali said the drone was shot inside Mali. Both of them still say the same thing up till date. Now, we all know that the AES has a policy: if you attack one, or react. So Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso pulled the ambassadors out of Algiers, and the airspace was closed. Algeria reciprocated and did the same. A year later, helicopters arrive, and everyone reaches the obvious conclusion: Algeria fell back. Algeria is paying it back. Except Algeria didn't apologize, and Mali received nothing from Algeria. You see, the country that lost the drone got nothing. So this isn't an apology. Apologies go to the person you upset. So why Niger? You see, the first clue isn't in any statement. It is from where those helicopters took off from. Not from Algiers, from Gizem. Gizem is not a city. It's a small base on Algeria's southern edge, almost touching Niger. You see, most often in diplomacy, if you are sending a friendly message, most often the package leaves from your capital. This left from the one stretch of ground Algeria worries about most. Algeria and Niger share about 1,000 kilometers of frontier. Maybe Algeria isn't defending Niger. Maybe Algeria is defending itself one country early. Because of every country Algeria could have picked, Niger is the one holding the command post. Now, quick background. In 2023, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger built their own alliance. We all know that. That's called the AES. After breaking with France and the ECOWAS, by December 2025, the AES had already formed a joint army made up of thousands of soldiers built to move into each other's borders. And the headquarters of that new force is situated in Niamey. So look at what Algeria actually did. It gave equipment to one country. But then that one country is where these 3 countries actually plan their war together. So you basically reach all 3 countries without sitting with Bamako to talk about that drone again. Now, one more layer, and that is my reading, not a fact. That drone came down in an area populated by the Tuareg, and that is in the southern part of Algeria. north of Mali. You see, southern Algeria, northern Mali, and northern Niger aren't three separate worlds to the people who live there. Families and trade run straight across those borders. And Algeria has spent years being careful about its own Tuareg communities in the south. So if Algeria was to send that equipment to Bamako, it shows clearly that it has already taken a side in the most sensitive quarrel in the Sahara. If it arms Niger, it gets a stronger border and stay out of it. Look, nothing about that choice is accidental. I thought the puzzle was solved. Then I looked at what the helicopters actually do. Heavily armed helicopters like these cover for convoy and hit confirmed positions. They also help to transport soldiers, supplies, and the wounded very fast. You see, out there, distance, unalive soldiers, far more than skilled doors. You see, I want you to picture a small outpost on roads that might be mined. That's very normal in Sahara. Armed groups have built their entire strategy on that. Helicopters shrink that gap significantly. So what Algeria really handed over was time. And remember, they didn't just give helicopters, they also gave spare parts and tons of ammunition. Donated aircrafts across Africa often end up for lack of spare parts. A helicopter without spare parts is just an expensive statue. This one was actually built to fly. See, after looking at all this, I had to look at the size of this war again. The African Center for Strategic Studies counted around 10,400 people being unalived by militant Islamist violence in the Sahel in 2024. In Niger alone, about 1,300. That is 60% more than the previous year. Almost all of them in one region, Tillaberi. The Sahel alone accounted for over half of people being unalived by terror on earth in 2024. Half in 3 countries. Now, credit where it's due though. Algeria has given 4 helicopters and a lot of ammunition. There are some countries that are watching from a safe distance and haven't even contributed even a rifle to help push the terror out of this region. But even Algeria knows 4 helicopters don't win a war this size on their own. Half in 3 countries. That is the weight these 3 countries, the AES, carry. And it is why 4 helicopters landing in Niamey matters so much. Which is some of these countries in this region have sent nothing to help the AES. Even a rival, Algeria, have sent 4 helicopters and lots of ammunition. Across the AES, the reaction was loud and positive. Many people called it a game changer. Now, nobody claimed 4 aircrafts can finish a war. What they saw was a neighbor finally turning up with something real. The Institute of Security Studies has studied every attempt at a shared force here. The ones that faded had the same gaps: money that never arrived, promises of equipment that never arrived, promises of shared data that never happened. Now look again at what Algeria actually loaded on those aircraft. Ammunition, spares, maintenance gear. Somebody read that list. So what else was this gift doing? I opened a different map. You already know about Nigeria's gas. Up through Niger, out through Algeria into Europe. There have been talks about this pipeline since 20 years ago. So what's new? What's new now? In July 2026, Algeria, Nigeria signed off a fresh feasibility study the same month as everything else here, and Algeria started digging its own section. Now I want you to look at who actually holds what. Nigeria has the gas, the biggest proven reserves on the continent. Algeria has the way out. It already sold Europe about 14% of the gas the EU used in 2024. Brussels calls Algeria strategic and reliable. And Niger has no gas. Niger has no buyers. Niger has the middle. Look, 4 helicopters can't guard 4,000 kilometers of pipe. Nobody thinks they can. Getting somebody to pay for it is the hard part, and nobody lends money for a route that men on motorbikes can shoot down. So if your export plan runs through Niger, and Niger's army has the capacity to rescue its wounded very fast and move its army fast enough to guide a pipeline, therefore what you just did isn't charity, it is homework. Now I thought that was the ending. It wasn't. Algeria isn't the only one chasing this gas. There is another route, Nigeria to Morocco, along the Atlantic through 13 countries. In fact, ECOWAS backed this route in Freetown on the 19th of July. Now, I want you to count the days. 3 weeks. That's the whole gap between the Freetown signing and helicopters landing in Niamey. Now, Algeria never said the two were connected, and I can't prove it. But then, governments don't usually move that fast for nothing. So we have two routes, two different ideas of how Africa gets joined together. One hugs the coast, one gets straight through the middle through Niger. Both of them call themselves African integration. Both are right, and they are chasing the same gas and the same money. Now, I'm going back to this. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger walked out of a bloc. That bloc is called ECOWAS. And now ECOWAS just backed a route that goes around AES. Algeria is building one that can't work without them. You see, geography doesn't care about who you're angry with, which brings me to the country everybody talks about and almost nobody talks to. Niger's economy was projected to grow near 8% in 2025. And that is one of the fastest rates in the world. That growth is still young, and the IMF's own numbers show it hasn't reached most households yet. So this is a country still building itself, and it is the one sitting in the middle of a continental argument about energy, hosting a 3-country army headquarters. Now, that gets both ways. Being the gateway brings partners, leverage, equipment. It also puts your name on a list. Anyone who wants a pipeline dead knows exactly which country to hit. Being important isn't the same as being safe. So why now? I think the answer sits in something that happened 2 years earlier and got far less attention than it deserved. In 2015, Algeria brokered a peace deal between Mali's government and most Tuareg armed movements. That deal made Algiers a referee in northern Mali without sending a single soldier. In January 2024, Mali's government declared it dead. That was the real break. The drone came after. The day that deal died, Algeria's whole method died with it. And this tells us that influence built by signature can be cancelled easily by signature. So Algeria changed the rules. You can't cancel spare parts supply by decree. You can't revoke a maintenance relationship in a press release. Algeria stopped arranging other people's peace and started building something physical inside somebody else's country. That's quieter power, but then it is much harder to take back. So is this Africa securing itself, or one African country buying a safer border through another African country? You see, honestly, I don't know. And anyone who sounds certain is selling you something. There is a lot nobody can answer yet. Who flies those helicopters and whether that pipeline finds its money before Morocco's route gets too far ahead to catch. You see, there is one more thing in the story, and it has nothing to do with pipelines. For 16 months, Algeria and its neighbors were closing airspace at each other over one aircraft on a border almost nobody has ever visited. And through every single month of that argument, the unaliving by the Tiro didn't slow down, not even once. You see, when neighbors fall out here, somebody always benefits. It's never the neighbors. So the most valuable thing that left Gizam that morning may not have been the aircraft. It would have been the example. Two furious governments deciding a shared border mattered more than the argument. Now, if that becomes the new habit, the arithmetic of this war changes. If that stays a one-off, the 4 helicopters simply become a footnote. And one last thing, Niger produces no gas. Niger has no European customers. Niger is still one of the youngest and the fastest growing economy on the planet. And right now, 2 of Africa's strongest states are building their plans around it. You don't need to own the thing everybody wants. You just need to stand on the road it travels. The road only pays if it's safe, and that's Africa's problem to solve now, not Europe's. I want to know what you think this really was. See you in my next video. Bye.
Captain Ibrahim Traore just dropped a bombshell announcement regarding the relationship between religion and state, the relationship between Islam, Burkina Faso, extremism, and nation building. This is what he had to say.
En train d'apprendre quelque chose. On a recensé les dernières statistiques, j'étais 800 et quelques. J'ai regardé la fiche. Personne n'est au courant de leur sortie. Personne n'est au courant de ce qu'ils font. Les ambassades qui sont là-bas ne sont pas au courant d'eux. Et vous savez ce qu'ils apprennent? La charia, les lois islamiques et la jurisprudence islamique. Personne de ces 800 et quelques qui m'ont montré la liste la dernière fois n'apprend un seul métier. Personne. C'est pour venir appliquer la charia ici.
And many people did not like it. The response was swift and from all corners of the internet. Members of the Islamic faith attacked the captain. They were furious. So what does it take for a leader to look his own people in the eye, then look at the religious extremism around them and say, enough? What does it take to stand before hundreds of your own citizens, students studying Islam in foreign lands, and tell them, come home, or you are no longer one of us? What does it take to tell the world, my country comes before my faith? And if you don't understand that, you don't understand survival. Ibrahim Traore has decided that the war against terror isn't just fought with guns. It's fought in mosques, in classrooms, in the minds of young men sent abroad to study Islam, and returning with something far more dangerous. July 16, 2026, a Thursday, in the town of Yagda, deep in the north of Burkina Faso, the region that has suffered most, bled most in the war against jihadist terror, Ibrahim Traore drops a bomb. Not a physical one, of course, something far more consequential. Close to 1,000 young Burkinabe men and women sent to Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries to study Islamic law in institutions funded by foreign governments, shaped by foreign ideologies, and in too many cases infiltrated by foreign agendas. And Traore just said the pipeline is closed. Not, please consider returning. Not, we have concerns about your curriculum. No, come home now or surrender your passport, your nationality, your identity as a son or daughter of Burkina Faso. The world gasps. Human rights organizations drafted their press releases. Foreign governments whispered about dictatorship. Social media erupted with calls for Traore's head. And Traore? He didn't blink, because Traore knows something the critics don't. He knows where those students come from. He knows what they are taught, and he knows what happens when they come back. For 4 years, Traore has been fighting a war that has killed thousands, disabled millions, and turned half his country into no-go zone. And in every terrorist camp, his soldiers have overrun, they've found the same thing. Copies of the Quran, religious texts, pamphlets, the same texts that are taught in the same universities where his citizens are studying Sharia. The same ideology, the same pipeline, the same foreign fingerprints. Traore isn't attacking Islam, he's attacking the weaponization of Islam. He's attacking the factories that produce the ideological ammunition for the very terrorists who are destroying his country. And he's doing it because nobody else will. May 28, 2026, the governor of Ouagadougou, Abdoulaye Basinga, signs a decree. The main Sunni mosque in the capital, the spiritual heart of Burkina Faso's Muslim community, is closed indefinitely. The world screams dictatorship, Islamophobia, persecution. But here's what the headlines don't tell you. 2 days earlier, Imam Dr. Mohammed Ishaq Kindo, one of the most powerful preachers in the country, was arrested, not for praying, not for preaching, not for being Muslim, for what he was preaching. Kindo had publicly denounced a proposed law aimed at regulating religious practices in Burkina Faso, a law that would require foreign-funded religious institutions to declare their financing, a law that would prevent preachers from using mosques to spread political agendas, a law that would protect the Burkinabe people from the same foreign influence that has destroyed Libya, fractured Mali, and turned the Sahel into a graveyard. Kindo did just criticize the law. He mobilized against it. He turned his pulpit into a political weapon. He told his followers that the state had no right to regulate religion, even as that same religion was being used to recruit terrorists, fund insurgents, and justify the murder of Burkinabe soldiers and civilians. And when his followers took to the streets, not to pray, but to riot, nearly 100 of them were detained and transferred for what authorities call civic and citizenship training. The critics called it brainwashing. Traore called it necessary. Because here's the truth the foreign press won't report. Imam Kindo wasn't arrested for being Muslim. He was arrested for being a threat to national security, for using a religious platform to undermine the same state that was trying to protect the very people who listened to him. And the mosque, it wasn't closed because Traore hates Islam. It was closed because it had become a staging ground for insurrection, because a house of worship was being used as a house of political warfare. Because when faith becomes a weapon against the state has every right, no, every duty to disarm it. Traore is fighting a war on two fronts, and he knows he can't win the shooting war without winning the ideological war first. For 4 years, he's been throwing soldiers at the insurgency, reclaiming territory, killing terrorists, pushing back the groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS that have turned the Sahel into the world's most dangerous region. And every time his soldiers clear a camp, they find the same thing: religious texts, Qurans, pamphlets, the ideological fuel that powers the physical war. Imperialism intends to use the religious channel, especially Islam, to destroy our country, Traore declared in Yagda. The extremists, you need to get a grip. The fight is launched. We will suspend them from preaching if they speak randomly. End of quote. Imperialism, that's Traore's word for foreign powers, state and non-state, who have turned Islam into a tool of conquest, who fund mosques and madrasas not to spread faith but to spread influence, who send young Africans to study Sharia and return with something else entirely. The jihadists don't manufacture their ideology in the bush, they import it. They receive it through the same religious network that Traore is now dismantling. The same universities, the same preachers, the same foreign-funded institutions that claim to be teaching Islam but are actually producing the next generation of ideological warriors. Those students studying Sharia abroad, Traore isn't saying they are all terrorists. He's saying the system that sends them there is compromised, that the curriculum is controlled by foreign powers with agendas that don't align with Burkina Faso's survival. That Sharia in a Saudi university and Sharia in a Burkinabe village are not the same thing, and the difference is killing his people. And then there is the other front, the domestic front, the preachers who use their pulpit to undermine the state, the student unions that criticize the government while terrorists murder soldiers, the NGOs that claim to defend human rights while foreign powers use them to destabilize the country. In April 2026, Traore's government dissolved 118 NGOs and suspended over 350 more. The critics screamed civic space, human rights, dictatorship. But look closer. Many of those NGOs were foreign funded. Many were involved in activities that, intentionally or not, served the interest of the same powers that want to see Traore fall, the same powers that propped up the old regime, the same powers that left Burkina Faso defenseless against the jihadist onslaught. Traore didn't dissolve them because he hates civil society. He dissolved them because in a war for national survival, you don't let the enemy operate inside your walls. Let's be clear about what Traore is really doing. History will judge Ibrahim Traore. It will judge whether closing a mosque was tyranny or necessity, whether recalling 1,000 students was persecution.
Revolutionary salute to our family, Big AJ, for the 1,000 Jews to the war chest. Revolution is real life. Absolutely appreciate that, little soldier. Salute.
Or protection, whether arresting an imam was oppression or survival. But here's what we know right now. The jihadists are losing ground. The foreign influence networks are being dismantled. The state is reclaiming control of its own religious institutions. And a young military captain who could have been just another coup leader is becoming something far more consequential. A leader who chose his country over his comfort, who chose action over appeasement, who looked at a nation bleeding from 1,000 ideological wounds and had the courage to cauterize them. Homeland or death, we will overcome. That's not just a motto, that's a mission. And Ibrahim Traore is carrying it out. One mosque at a time, one student at a time, one impossible decision at a time. The Traore gambit is on, and Burkina Faso's survival hangs in the balance. Thank you for watching.
Ibrahim Traore. This guy needs to be studied. There has to be a dedicated curriculum for the study of how to lead under pressure, with Captain Ibrahim Traore in focus in universities across Africa. And I'm not kidding. When you see the kinds of ideas Traore implements, you may think it's too insignificant to change anything in terms of job creation and salaries. And before you know it, ladies and gentlemen, it has expanded and has a huge market. A huge market is actually made around it. Supply chain is made around it, and supplies are coming and production is moving forward, and the economy of the local area changes. Unto whom much is given, much is expected. Ladies and gentlemen, and you would expect much more from the larger and popular and more populated African countries. You expect them to do way more economically. But that's not what is happening. That's not what we see. Then you have a captain, a soldier, come along with Burkina Faso, having less than what others have, but doing way more than those with more. A country with no seaport, a country in a perpetual state of jihadist and insurgent attacks, a country that is partially a desert, a country under sanctions and led by a soldier. And in spite of all of that, ladies and gentlemen, with the right kind of leadership, they end up becoming more productive as a state than those without any of these challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, make that make sense to me. Captain Ibrahim Traore, this guy needs to be studied. There has to be a dedicated curriculum for the study of how to lead under pressure, with Captain Ibrahim Traore in focus in universities across Africa. And I'm not kidding. By the way, my name is Cyrus, and this is the Doom Network in Accra, Ghana. Be kind to subscribe if today is your first time with us and when you find value on this network. Now, check out this particular record of Traore. In the year 2022, Burkina Faso had an inflation rate of 14.1%. By 2026, the inflation rate in Burkina Faso is 1.4%. From 14.1 to 1.4%. And ladies and gentlemen, the rate actually went down so low as to minus 0.5% in 2025, last year. Inflation went down so low, it was actually called deflation in Burkina Faso. And they had to allow prices to go up just a little bit to encourage more production. The same country and the same external and internal attacks, same people with same economic challenges, but a different type of leadership, and boom, everything begins to change for the good. Ask yourself this. Ever since you became an adult and paid attention to economic matters, ever since you went to school and learned the basics of economics, has there been any point ever where you were taught of deflation in any African country that went down into a negative digit? Negative digit. Have you ever heard of such, ladies and gentlemen? Never has this ever happened in any country in Africa. But a soldier who is supposed to be rather good with a gun is rather proven more knowledgeable in economics than the so-called learned. Make this make sense to me. Inflation is killing many businesses in Africa. Every single day, businesses are dying. And governments are talking and promising and changing, and nothing is changing. And small businesses are dying, and foreigners are taking over local industries, and nothing seems to work. Chinese finished products are killing local businesses in Africa, and the cycle seems uncontrollable. And then you have a soldier doing something unconventional, completely different. This is refreshing. When you see the kinds of ideas Traore implements, you may think it's too insignificant to change anything in terms of job creation and salaries. And before you know it, ladies and gentlemen, it has expanded and has a huge market. A huge market is actually made around it. Supply chain is made around it, and supplies are coming, and production is moving forward, and the economy of the local area changes. Listen, this is the only head of state in the world currently who moves at his own pace. And it may look slow at some point and small, but actually it ends up being sustainable and locally owned. Notice, the figures I gave you are not even my figures. These are figures from the World Bank, ladies and gentlemen. The World Bank figures. And the World Bank projects a further reduction in the inflation of Burkina Faso. Meanwhile, production and processing are still increasing in Burkina Faso. Politicians keep telling us we need a certain level of inflation to encourage production, which may be true. But they keep telling us these things because they themselves have no plans of getting involved in the making of anything, which actually means when they talk about encouraging production, local production, it is simply encouraging production, local production of private sector people, which is currently being controlled by foreigners. So in actual sense, they are protecting the production of their foreign partners in different African countries to ensure their continuous benefits, ladies and gentlemen. Every single time inflation goes up, some local producer loses their business. You buy raw materials today, imported from abroad, at a certain price, and you return to the same place to buy more, only to find out you can't buy more because prices just went up. Burkina Faso is doing something different. Ghanaians, pay attention to what I'm saying. Everything in Burkina Faso now is centered around the local businesses of the people. They supply themselves first, and then they look outside. And soon, their tomato paste, for instance, will take over the markets in Ghana. Let me be honest with you. One of these two is right. It's either the politicians in Africa, it's either they know how to run a sustainable, productive economy and they choose not to do it, or they don't know. It's one of the two. Both cannot be right. Because it's strange how a soldier can walk in and do the very things the most learned of our leaders cannot do. This does not make any sense. And everything he's doing is something all African countries could be doing, but are not doing. You need to own your own resources. That's what he's doing. You need to mine them yourself, if not all. You need to add value to what you produce. You need to go into agriculture as a state. You need to be at the forefront of production and manufacturing as a state. You have to be competitive. You have to diversify the businesses of the government. The government must work. You need to construct your own roads and maintain them. Yeah. I mean, there is so much you can do as a state that can drastically reduce the money that's always leaving your country. There is so much you can do, and also cut back on the importation. There is so much we can do. When you put the people to work, for instance, you drop unemployment and poverty. The people become responsible because they have jobs to do. 2 years ago, Burkina Faso under Captain Ibrahim Traore acquired 2 aircrafts for commercial use. I just remember this. Embraer E190, the LR, and an E170 for Air Burkina. Many African countries, including Ghana, doesn't have one. Nigeria doesn't have one. Burkina Faso has 2. See how Burkina Faso is transforming under Traore. I want you to see these videos. Just take a look at them and refresh yourself. Be hopeful in how things can change on this continent. It is not all done. It is not all finished. It is not all going to be gloomy and bad news all the time. There's coming a time where the right kind of leadership will come into play. And Burkina Faso is showing us the way. Traore is showing us the way. The guy is different. The guy is genius. The guy, he's a soldier, but he thinks deeper and farther than the economist, than the politician. He knows exactly what to do, and that is what he's doing. And it is significantly changing things in that country. Never before, ladies and gentlemen. Watch it till the end, and I'll see you in the next one. Just take a look at how transformed Burkina Faso is becoming today. My name is Cyrus, and thank you for watching till the end. Watch this video. It is bye-bye for now.
Coffee. Follow me.